2015, I was not optimistic because nobody was working on the hard problems. The energy R&D budgets had gone down. The venture investing in climate had gone down. It was completely out of fashion. So I don't know what people were optimistic about then. The fact is, we built essentially from scratch, with lots of supporters, a really mind-blowing level of innovation against emissions. And in the last 9 years, that's gone better than I would have expected. So only now could you even, plausibly be optimistic about the path of emissions. And someone who said, hey, nobody's ever scaled things up like the speed that we knew to before, they're welcome to say, hey, I'll believe this when I see it. In the meantime, some people who care about this issue are really out, trying to think, do we need permitting reform? Do we find, what new ideas haven't we found yet? How do we fund people with those new ideas? How do we get them?
And my grandfather, Richard J. O'Connor. We will always love and miss you.
Timothy Paul Gilbert.
Paul Stewart Gilbey.
Paul John Gill.
Mark Y. Gillis.
Evan Hunter Gillette.
Ronald Lawrence Gilligan.
Rodney C. Gillis.
Laura Gilley.
John F. Ginley.
Donna Marie Giordano.
Jeffrey John Giordano.
John Giordano.
Stephen A. Giorgetti.
Martin Giovinazzo.
Kumkum Girolamo.
Salvatore Gito.
Cynthia Giugliano.
Man John Balaj.
Diane Gladstone.
Keith Alexander Glasgow.
Thomas Irwin Glasser.
Edmund Glaser.
Harry Glenn.
Barry H. Glick.
Jeremy Logan Glick.
Stephen Glick.
John T. Nazzo.
William Robert Gottschalk.
Michael Gallo Aramella.
Brian F. Goldberg.
Jeffrey G. Goldflam.
Michelle Goldstein.
Monica Goldstein.
Stephen Ian Goldstein.
Ronald F. Galinsky.
Andrew H. Golkin.
Dennis James Gomes.
Enrique Antonio Gomez.
Jose Benvenido Gomez.
Manuel Gomez Jr.
And my husband, Peter Mutos. Thank you to all who keep us safe in the armed forces, and in remembrance of my husband's deceased father, Colonel Gus Mutos, survived by his wife, Lieutenant Colonel Lynette Mutos.
And my brother, firefighter Michael Francis Lynch. Your boys were 6 months and 3 years old when you were murdered. You did a beautiful job, and you'd be very proud of them. And you only know what we're going through when it happens to you. Others have empathy. So let's all think about what's happening right now in other countries when barbarians are instilling terror in people. Let's not forget that. This is continuing. This has to stop.
All All right, you have been listening to the observance of the fall of the South Tower in Lower Manhattan. We take you now to the moment of silence near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, to observe the crash of hijacked Flight 93.
Thomas E. Burnett, Jr. William Joseph Cashman.
My sister Georgine Rose Corrigan Marisay.
Patricia Cushing.
Wonderful son, brother, father, my cousin, Captain Jason M. Dahl.
Joseph DeLuca.
Bloomberg covers the world with unmatched reach and resources. From more than 120 countries, the moment news breaks, 24 hours a day. Bloomberg, context changes everything.
This is Bloomberg News Now.
News when you want it at the touch of a button.
Another volatile day on Wall Street. We're seeing big moves.
All eyes on Capitol Hill as Democrats and Republicans prepare.
Today's job numbers casting doubt on the Fed's next move. Inflation remains front and center. And that's news when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. Get it 24/7 on the Bloomberg Business app, Bloomberg.com, and anywhere you get your podcasts.
Bloomberg News Now. Context changes everything.
Earnings.
I know it's like your Super Bowl, right?
I can't wait. It's like opening presents in the morning.
All right, it will be exciting.
Nobody covers earnings like Bloomberg.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Open Interest. Let's take a look at the stock market right now. Of course, 36 minutes into the U.S. trading day, you can see we are at session lows on the S&P 500, down nearly 0.9%. Same, too, if you take a look at big tech, the NASDAQ 100 now down about 0.3%, your relative outperformer today. It's interesting what's going on in the bond market. Of course, the 10-year yield now flat on the day. We had been higher, moving higher across the curve after that CPI print. Not so much right now, back to flat. And it's amazing, Matt. If you take a look at the S&P 500, just 38 stocks are trading in the green right now.
Yeah, a very strong breadth to the downside. So even though we're not seeing, 1%, 2% losses,
we're on our way, though.
We're seeing a real conviction, I guess, is the point behind that selling. And it follows, obviously, the worst start to a month. I can't get over this little factoid. Since data going back to 1953, that's how bad last week was.
Listen, like Katie's been saying, we knew this was always going to be a very tough month in the markets. Now, the question is, how long does it stay tough, given we have that November election? Things will be choppy.
All right, let's get more insight now on how the CPI data that we got this morning will affect markets, will affect the Fed. Omar Sharif joins us, Inflation Insights founder and president. And let me just get your first take on inflation. Only going back 2 significant digits doesn't make it look that bad, 0.3% on the core month over month. How's it look to you?
Yeah, good morning. Look, I think at the end of the day, it was a disappointing reading. We were expecting slightly lower print last month. We've had 0.2 cores now for several months, so jumping back up to 0.3 is certainly disappointing. And some of the underlying details, especially some of the shelter data, was not great. But that said, I think the broader picture is headline inflation is down to 2.5%. Core inflation, we're down to about 3.2% now. So I think the broader picture is still a good one, but I think it's just moving. We've hit a bit of a speed bump, if you will. And Chair Powell's talked about this before, that it's not going to be a straight line down. We've had several good months in a row. We've hit a bit of a road bump here, this month. But I do expect that we'll continue to see better inflation numbers ahead.
What gives you so much faith in that, Omer? Because if you think about some of the components here where things are a little stickier, housing has been a problem. You also have airline prices, and there's a lot of chatter in the industry now, in the airline industry, given the state we are in right now with airlines, that prices could actually move up meaningfully from here. Are there more forces that could make future inflation prints more difficult?
Yeah, let me start with airlines and hotel rates was also another index that was up a lot today. Those, first of all, those are not indexes you want to hang your hat on when you're thinking about where inflation's headed, down the road. They're extremely volatile. Honestly, over the course of the entire year, they tend to kind of balance out, meaning they really don't do a whole lot over the course of the full year, even though month to month you can get a lot of volatility in airfares, a lot in hotel rates. But I would say with respect to airfares, one of the positives is this big decline we've seen in oil prices in recent weeks. That should help to lower jet fuel prices, which should help to some extent lower airfares going forward, even though overall travel demand is still really robust. So I just really wouldn't put a lot of stock in month-to-month movements in these particular types of components. Shelter, you mentioned, that was far and away the most disappointing aspect of this report. We had seen some very, very good readings really all year. We've seen shelter slow down. We hit a bit of a bump in July. And then today was absolutely disappointing. OER accelerating to 0.5 is concerning. What I would say is that we have seen the micro data, the raw data that goes into these indexes, slowed very materially in the second quarter. There's this experimental index called the All-Tenant Repeat Rent Index. It fell from 5.6% to 4% in the second quarter. It tends to lead the CPI by about a quarter or two. So I expect that data should begin to moderate going forward. But I will say today's...
So White House's economic advisor Brainard on CNBC says, I think that we are turning the page on inflation.
And Omer, the conversations we have about inflation, especially on CPI day, they tend to be very technical, very numbers focused, of course, very academic. But I'm curious how you're thinking about the real feel of inflation, because you take a look under the hood at some of the details that we've gone through. You had airfares.
US stocks extend their fall. S&P 500 down 1% now.
For meats, poultry, fish, eggs rising 0.8%, and housing costs, as we've been talking about, shelter costs up 0.5%. How do you think the experience of inflation has changed on the ground over the course of the past few months?
Yes, I think we can kind of split this up into two parts. One is the parts of the CPI that do a very good job of capturing what people are seeing on a day-to-day basis. So you mentioned food prices. That's a really great place to start, because we know the CPI does a great job in capturing food prices, because they're literally going out and scanning the price of items in grocery stores. When you look there, we have slowed down. Remember, we were growing about 11-12% year over year in terms of food prices about a year ago. We've slowed down to 2% now. So I think there you've seen, again, prices are not falling, but that growth rate has really flattened out to sort of a pre-pandemic type pace. That's good news at the grocery store. But there are other items that the CPI doesn't really capture as well, which are obviously hitting consumers' wallets. So, things like your home insurance costs. Those are not really measured in the CPI. It's really much more based, for example, on renter's insurance. So that's a cost where we know it is accelerating. It is on the rise. It's going to keep rising probably over the course of the year. But that homeowner's insurance stuff isn't really captured in the CPI. So
White House Economic Advisor Brainard says housing is continuing to be sticky.
Dramatically for consumers, and there are others that are worsening that unfortunately don't really show up in the CPI, just given the way that it's constructed. So on balance, I think still good news given the overall index is down at 2.5%. But there are some things in there that consumers clearly are still feeling that we're not necessarily going to see in the CPI.
Oh, consumers are going to be reeling from this. Omer, consumers are going to be reeling from the inflation we've seen over the last couple of years for a generation. I mean, this isn't the kind of thing that turns itself around when the Fed is on point for a year or two, right?
Yeah, look, normally, the only way to get these prices down is deflation, which is a situation that nobody wants to be in, especially the Fed. But we are, where you do tend to see prices come off in areas like energy, for example, is down 4% year over year. So we're seeing relief at gasoline. But a lot of these other prices, services prices, especially where prices have increased, they're unlikely to come down. So this higher level is likely here to stay for the foreseeable future. Now the question is, can we get that growth rate back down to something around 2%? And again, we've made a lot of good progress there, but there's still more work to be done in terms of getting inflation all the way back to 2%.
Omer, it just seems like in just under a minute here, there are a lot of factors here that are outside of the Federal Reserve's control. What are those aspects here that will not be significantly moved, at least in the near term, by a reduction in rates?
Yeah, look, I think shelter is the most obvious one. One is they don't really control anything having to do with housing supply, so that's one element of it. The second is just the methodology of housing and shelter. It's always going to sort of lag what we're seeing in real time in terms of changes in rents. And so that's just not something the Fed can control. That's been with us for a long time. That's a well-known aspect of inflation. But, I think at the same time, the underlying raw data, as I mentioned, is showing that we should continue to see improvement in shelter. It's just been a rough couple of months there, but I do expect that to continue to move lower. So even though the Fed can't control it, I think it's moving in the right direction for them over the coming months.
Omer, we thank you so very much for your time. That is Omer Sharif, Inflation Insights founder and president. Let's get a look at where stocks are moving this hour. It's a tough tape out there. Here's Abigail Doolittle. Abby.
It is a tough tape, Chanel. If we take a look at the shares of Berkshire Hathaway, down 2.5%. Last time I looked, the worst day in about a week or so, but yet superlative may have moved back toward August, given the size of this decline. Now, this, of course, is a broad measure of the markets, but outpacing the S&P 500's decline, I would argue some of this has to do with the post-debate market weighing in. This is more of a Trump trade stock, given the fact that this entity has one of the highest absolute tax bills in the world. If President Trump, former President Trump, were to be reelected, he's proposing a 15% corporate tax, which would really favor Berkshire Hathaway more so than Kamala Harris's proposed 28% corporate tax. So again, this may be in favor of the Harris trade. In fact, if we take a look at the Harris trade, we're going to see some green on the screen, specifically for First Solar, up 7.3%. Molina Healthcare, which is Medicare, Medicaid, also higher. Interestingly, though, some of those home builders that gear toward first-time home builders and the possibility of that $25,000 down payment for first-time home buyers that Kamala Harris has proposed, well, they are down today. So a little bit of mixed here. But where it's not mixed, if we take a look at the actual Trump trade, including DJT, down 15.5%, the worst day since April of this year. We also have Humana, which would be more toward actual insurance plans, down 5.7%. And Rockwell Automation, well, it is down 4.3%. So overall, the Trump trade clearly in the red. The Harris trade a little bit mixed toward the green, and then Berkshire Hathaway down with the markets. But again, Katie, I would suggest that it is down more potentially because of this Trump trade post-debate.
You're right there, of course, Abigail Doolittle. Appreciate the roundup, highlighting some of the single stocks on a day where almost everything is down. In the S&P 500 right now, only 17 stocks in the green. We'll continue to monitor that. And of course, the political scene, of course, we'll get into last night's debate and a celebrity endorsement of one of the candidates. All of that is next. This is Bloomberg.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute technology news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Annabelle Drawlers in Taipei, and this is Bloomberg.
There is this real momentum from Wall Street.
We are basically deep in the European earnings season.
Take a look at how we're faring when it comes to Asian markets.
It's the countdown to the market open as we bring you the first trades across Europe.
We'll debate the most important stories and what will drive the big investment decisions throughout the morning. I'm Guy Johnson.
I'm Kriti Gupta.
And I'm Anna Edwards. Join us every weekday morning for the opening trade, live at 7 a.m. here in London.
Only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
As we spend some time here on the broader presidential race.
Let's focus in on European politics.
Makes you wonder how politics might play out.
It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. We'll show you what's happening in ETFs like no one else. Bloomberg ETF IQ, Monday on Bloomberg.
Let's get now to high interest to look at what's making headlines around the world. U.S. mortgage rates continued their slide down last week, hitting the lowest level.
In 10 minutes' time now, at the bottom of the hour, see the release of the weekly EIA inventories numbers. Crude oil inventories forecasted a build of 1.05 million on the prior draw of 6.873 million. The range sees a build of 2 million to a draw of 0.82 million. Gasoline inventories forecasted for a flat read of 0 million from the prior build of 0.848 million. Distillate inventories forecast for a build of 0.275 million on the prior draw of 0.371 million. And inventories of crude in Cushing, the prior was a draw of 1.142 million. For the crude oil stock change, keep in mind yesterday the release of the private API crude oil stock change came in a draw of 2.79 million on the expected build of 0.7 million.
Because, quote, she fights for the rights and causes I believe need a warrior to champion them, end quote.
All right, Matt, sticking with the debate, here are some of the takeaways from last night's showdown between Trump and Harris.
Wait a minute, I'm talking now, if you don't mind, please. Does that sound familiar? We have inflation like very few people have ever seen before, probably the worst in our nation's history.
His plan is to do what he has done before, which is to provide a tax cut for billionaires and big corporations. People start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom.
She said people start leaving. People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go. I showed up for a speech. I said, I think it's going to be big.
To attack our nation's capital, the freedom to make decisions about one's own body should not be made by the government.
Well, there she goes again. It's a lie. I'm not signing a ban, and there's no reason to sign a ban because we've gotten what everybody wanted.
Under Donald Trump's presidency, he ended up selling American chips to China to help them.
We hardly make chips anymore. She hates Israel. At the same time, in her own way, she hates the Arab population.
So that's absolutely not true. He's trying to, again, divide and distract from the reality.
All right, let's unpack it all now with Veda Partners Economic Policy Research Director, Henrietta Treys. Henrietta, great to have you with us. Of course, Veda Partners was placing about 60% odds on a Trump win heading into last night's debate. This morning, are you rethinking those?
Well, we really are waiting to see what the swing state voters think. Going into last night, 50% of the electorate thought that Trump was going to win. And at the end of the night, only 30% thought that he actually did. So this was clearly a win for Kamala Harris last night, as the tape is showing. And y'all just went through the segment walking through the upticks in clean energy stock names with the anticipation that Kamala Harris will win. There's only about a 5% basket of American voters who are undecided right now. Only 14% of viewers last night said that they felt like maybe they should rethink their decisions, and then ultimately only 4% of the electorate did. So it highlights the polarization of the country. Fundraising was through the roof for Kamala Harris last night. So we're going to wait to see how that translates to key states like Arizona and Georgia and see if it moves the needle.
To that end, you saw a couple of policy measures here that she swung off the left about. For example, you think about what she said about fracking and the way she framed the energy story here about the lack of reliance on foreign oil. You also think about what she said about her own gun ownership. Henrietta, did she win anybody over here on the other side of the aisle? She talked about her conversation with the Republican Party a lot.
Yeah, it really is phenomenal to see a Democratic candidate on the stage talking about how they and their vice president are gun owners, and they've been endorsed by the former Vice President Dick Cheney and his daughter Liz Cheney. It's a striking turn of events that 10 years ago you would never have expected. She made last night repeated appeals to those independent voters, suburban voters, married voters, more middle class, educated voters, and low education voters to say, look, if you don't like what you're seeing from Donald Trump right now, there is a place for you in my party. And, speaking directly to gun owners, directly to Dick Cheney Republicans, it was a clear overture to those members to say, hey, feel free to come over to my campaign.
Especially for one of the most leftist members of the Senate in history, right? VoteView has ranked her as the second most left-wing member of the Senate after Elizabeth Warren in the 116th and 117th Congresses. And going back to 1824, only 15 senators have a voting record that's to the left of hers. Has she really swung to the center in the last 4 years?
Well, I think if you do yourself a favor to look at what that data set consists of. She wasn't a senator for
So in
very long.
5 minutes' time now, at the bottom of the hour, see the release of the weekly EIA crude oil inventories numbers. Crude oil forecast to build of 1.05 million on the prior draw of 6.873 million. The range sees a build of 2 million to a draw of 0.82 million. Gasoline inventories forecasted for a flat read at 0 on the prior build of 0.848 million. Distillate inventories forecast a build of 0.275 million on the prior draw of 0.371 million. Crude Cushing inventories, the prior withdrawal of 1.142 million. Keep in mind yesterday the US API private crude oil stock change came in at a draw of 2.79 million on the expected build of 0.7 million.
Where the rates stand now, it's to the left, but not versus the far left spectrum of the Democratic Party.
And Henrietta, of course, we do have reaction from Donald Trump appearing on Fox and Friends this morning saying that he's not inclined to debate Kamala Harris again. Do you think that's the correct move here? Do you think that will ultimately help or hurt him when it comes to the next 2 months or so?
Well, you certainly don't want another losing debate, but I think what happens when you are the candidate that's on the decline is you want to shake things up. So there have been some folks on the Trump campaign team who have said that they will commit to a second debate, but Trump himself, as you point out on Fox and Friends this morning, says he was not inclined to do so, rejected that idea last night. But if they need to shake things up, you could see that through new policy platforms. What he's done in the past to stay on the tax conversation is he's dropped his platform from a 20% corporate tax rate to 15% to try to move further to the right. And you could see something on the policy side, or he could commit to another debate. I would be surprised at this point. But I think the Harris team wants the vice presidential debate on October 1st to be the next one. So they're probably going to get in a back and forth about the timing.
Henrietta, great to get your perspective. Really important to read your research. Henrietta Treys joining us, Veda Partners. We appreciate it. Now, Of course, today marks the 23rd anniversary of the 9/11 terror attacks here in the United States. Memorials are being held around the country, remembering and honoring the 2,983 men, women, and children killed in those attacks. And we're now heading to the next moment of silence in observance of when the North Tower fell in Lower Manhattan. And of course, it's accompanied by reading of the names of some of those we lost.
19. Uncle John, while I do not remember the 9 months I had with you, your accomplishments and personality have always been a constant in my life. When I see Boy Scouts, Marines, police officers,
1 minute remaining for the
firefighters,
EIA inventories numbers. I'll leave with the crude oil inventories.
When I see acts of kindness, determination, and above all loyalty, I think of you and everything my father and aunts have told me about your dedication to our family. I have grown in the light of your memory, and it has made me a better person. I hold these thoughts close today, and I say a prayer for you, as well as the other victims and their families. May you and every victim of this tragic day always be honored and remembered. And my brother Anil Umarkar. Anil, today is your daughter Womika's first day of graduate school. Please give her
10
your
seconds.
blessings and keep smiling on her. And my husband Ganesh K. Ladkat. Honey, I love you. I miss you. You'll be happy to know that I'm married now to a
Build
wonderful man who's a
0.833 million. Build
volunteer firefighter in our
0.833 million.
town,
That's
takes
higher
care
than the
of me every
expected.
single day.
Sorry, lower
I
than the
love you.
expected build of 1.05 million.
forward to seeing you
Gasoline
soon.
inventory is a build of 2.31 million. A build of 2.31 million. Higher than the expected flat read of 0. Distillate inventory is a build of 2.308 million. A build of 2.308 million. Higher than the expected build of 0.275 million. Crude Cushing inventory is a draw of 1.7 million. 1.7 million. Seeing some weakness in WTI prices here following the unexpected storage draws in gasoline and distillate inventories. Again, larger than expected build seen.
The names that move markets are on Bloomberg.
Our role in the world, our role in NATO in supporting the Ukrainians in this war, the unprovoked war that Russia has instigated in Ukraine, our support for the Indo-Pacific, for providing a counterbalance to China. All of that is in our interest, and whoever's president, I'm sure, is going to do what's in the best interest of the United States.
It is not a time for America to back off of its commitment around the globe. And I think there's a justification for us making certain that we do the right things in a way that we share the burdens with our allies. But I don't expect America to walk away from the world in any administration. It's about American security, and it's about making certain our adversaries, present and future, know that when America's committed to something, they're there for the long haul.
Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Good morning.
Good morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Welcome back to the opening trade.
This is Bloomberg Technology.
This is the Asia Trade.
You're watching the close.
Welcome to Balance of Power.
This is Bloomberg. Today's CFOs are reshaping the C-suite. Bloomberg's chief future officer shines a spotlight on these dynamic leaders. Healthcare giant Johnson & Johnson is staking its future on innovation. Making investment decisions under pressure has become business as usual for CFO Joe Wolk.
The world is coming at us faster than it ever has. We're getting information more quickly. We're going to have to move faster. The competition's moving faster.
Watch Chief Future Officer Wednesday, only on Bloomberg. Bloomberg Surveillance covers the latest in global markets and the political events that influence your world. Join Jonathan Farrell, Lisa Abramowitz, and Anne-Marie Hordern only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
This is Bloomberg Open Interest. Let's take a look at markets about an hour into the U.S. trading day because, boy, is it ugly. You take a look at the S&P 500 down about 1.5%. We are trading at session lows right now, of course, on the S&P 500.
The S&P 500 Bank Index down 2.4% after falling close to 3% in the last session.
You can see sinking as well, falling in tandem on a day where you have incredible breadth to the downside. On the S&P 500, just 17 stocks in the green, and as you would expect, of course, you're seeing the volatility index, the VIX, rising as well, now trading with a 21 handle, and you're not exactly finding a haven when it comes to the bond market. 2-year
Brent oil
Treasury
futures
yields
pairing their
have been
gains
higher.
after
Now
the
they're
US
pretty
EIA
much
storage
flat
report.
on the day. Shanali.
And we welcome now our Bloomberg television and radio audiences because joining us now is Howard Lutnick, who is the chairman and CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald and BGC Group. Cantor Fitzgerald lost 658 employees in the 9/11 attack and another 61 people at an affiliate, Euro Brokers. Howard lost his brother Gary in the North Tower. Gary was only 36 years old. He also lost his best friend Doug at 39. This is a heavy day for you, Howard. 23 years later, how do you honor them today?
So today, all of our employees waive their day's pay, and we ask our clients to do as much business as they possibly can, and this is our charity day. So all around you, everywhere around me, are people donating every penny they make today to charities. We're going to raise about $12 million, and we're going to give it to 150 different charities around the world, because with these 5,000 people helping me, we're going to turn something horrible into something beautiful today.
I want to talk more about the legacy here because one of Cantor's lawyers published an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal overnight about how retirements at Cantor Fitzgerald are rare given the firm had lost so many employees. And there are just so many employees now entering the workforce as well, Howard, who were not even born at the time of 9/11. How, in some ways, are you still building Cantor forward with that memory of 9/11 as such a big part of that Cantor story?
So, you know, these families are a part of us, and they stay a part of us. So we have a job offer out to all of the children of the people we lost. So just this week, we have a young lady joining us who worked for, who was born, basically her mother was pregnant right at 9/11, and now she's graduating college, and she's joining us. So we have about 36 children who work for us now, but we've had hundreds come, and it's been 23 years, so they move on with their careers. We train them, and we help them flourish in life. So these families are a part of us, and they are part of our DNA, and it's amazing and uplifting today. So at 4:30 today, we'll have a memorial, and we'll get together with all their families, and we'll read their names and put their pictures up. But we are together with these families, and the firm is together with them, and all these people. Remember, we raised $180 million to take care of the families, and the way we did
The dollar
that is
extending losses against the yen, falling to a near 8-month low, last down 0.7% at 141.42 yen.
I have at BGC, GFI, and Cantor Fitzgerald, I have I have the best employees.
Well, it's certainly an important moment in history, in American history, for you and for Cantor personally, so we appreciate you being here. But of course, it's also a big moment for the country, in our political history as well. And of course, you're in Lower Manhattan, and you're recently surrounded by former presidents, the current president, and of course, some presidential hopefuls there. So Howard, I'll ask you, what did you make of the debate last night between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris?
Well, before, this morning I went to the memorial for the reading of the names, and it was the most respectful thing. You had Kamala Harris, you had President Joe Biden, then you had Mike Bloomberg in the middle, and then you had Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, all there showing tremendous respect to the events of September 11th. You've got to understand that we've got to take out terrorism, and we've got to take out jihad. It has to end. It's got to be important to these people. And, I like that Donald Trump says he's going to return the hostages and take it to Hamas. I would like to hear Kamala Harris say the same thing. We've got to get the hostages out. We've got to crush Hamas, and we've got to crush jihad. We know jihad. We lost 658 people from Cantor. We lost 61 people from Eurobrokers. We've got to end jihad. Everyone in the United States knows it. Today's the day we remember it. It's got to end. We've got to end it on the earth.
I'll take then this opportunity to ask you, Howard, how you thought President Trump did in the debate last night. Of course, you have been named as one of the co-chairs of his transition team, were he to win. What did you think of his performance against Kamala Harris?
Well, look, I think Kamala Harris outperformed her expectations. I think she did a nice job. But Donald Trump, he hit every point. I mean, he hit every point. He stayed on immigration, which is unbelievable. I mean, why is the southern border open? He had it closed. Why, on the first day, did Joe Biden, with an executive order, open back up the border? I just don't understand why they would let all these people in, right? Inflation is huge and at an incredible high. So that first question, which is, are Americans better off? Kamala Harris told us a story about her upbringing because she didn't want to talk about the fact that prices for your groceries were up 50%. Gas is up 100%. The Inflation Reduction Act was really the Inflation Explosion Act. And so I think there were a lot of points to make. You can't make them all. I think he made a lot of them. And this is an incredible race. It's important for America, and I thought the debate was really important. If they have another one, I think that will be really important too. It'd be nice if the moderators didn't get involved in the debate and make comments only against Donald Trump. That would have been better. But look, you can't help it. It is what it is. But I think it's great when they talk. I wish Kamala Harris would give press conferences and answer questions and show the country who she is. That would be really helpful and really important for the country.
Howard, you came out of the debate yesterday and you had betting markets swing very much in Kamala Harris's favor. And then on the
US Treasury yields turn higher as US stock posts sharp losses now. 10-year yield last down 2.2 basis points.
Now, you, of course, are very close to Trump, have been a very prominent fundraiser. Do you think he should be leaning into a round two for a debate?
Well, the thing about Donald Trump is he knows his debate. If you think about me, I have maybe 100,000 followers, and he has 100 million followers. So I think I go with what he thinks. But look, I thought it's important for people to hear what she has to say. So to hear her out and to have her be out there and stop hiding in the basement and sort of get out there and talk, I think Donald Trump's got a lot to say. He's got a big plan. He's got a program, and he's got his record of 3% growth, 3% GDP growth, 3% wage growth, and under 2% inflation. So, I mean, he had a great record as president. But as I said, I'd like to hear her give press conferences. I'd like to hear her just answer questions in an open forum. How can you run and be president of the United States without answering questions in an open forum? It just doesn't make sense to me, but I think it's an amazing race. I think we have now, it's exciting, and we all watched the debate last night. We all have our opinions, but obviously, I love when Donald Trump debates. I'd be happy if he did it again, but he knows better, and he understands, and, I'm on his side.
Howard, Howard, because you've been on his side, especially as a prominent donor as well, what does fundraising look like from here? It's really interesting to see the way that both corporate America and Wall Street has been shaping up against these two candidates. You have the Walton family members throwing a fundraiser for Harris in the near future. How do you counter that?
Well, I think, look, Donald Trump is fundraising. Kamala Harris is fundraising. I think, the television airwaves are going to be incredibly crowded with advertising from both sides. And I think I don't think Donald Trump is having any trouble raising money. I don't think Kamala Harris is having any trouble raising money. So we can look forward to an enormous season of ads on television. But I think it's important to hear what the candidates have to say. The more they speak in their own voice, the better it is for America. As I said, Donald Trump is fearless. He went on ABC, which obviously was going to be against him because he's a fearless leader. I would like to see Kamala Harris show fearless strength and backbone and get out there and talk. I think if she got out there and talked, I think it would be great for America to hear her talk. How do you run for president and not get out there and talk? So I think the world should encourage her to get out there and talk because I know Donald Trump is willing to take all takers, answer all questions, and get out there. And I think that's just basic.
And Howard, I'd like to talk about you a little bit, actually, and your role in, of course, the campaign, because last month you were named as co-chair of Donald Trump's transition team, should he win a second term, co-chair alongside Linda McMahon. How is that going? What are you focusing on right now?
Well, sort of the way transition works is if he doesn't win, then it's not much. So what the campaign is focused on is winning, and I'll be focused on helping make sure that if he wins, there's an extraordinary administration around him. The scale of people who want to serve and are willing to serve far, far exceeds anything from 2016 and 2020, because now it's just a political race. That's all it is. Some people, more and more people come up to me and say they're supporting Donald Trump than ever before in my life. So I think the answer is you're going to see, if Donald Trump is elected, you're going to see the greatest group of administration and the greatest group of leaders enter this government. And I'm just helping him every way I can. But the key is he's got to win.
Yeah.
Transition isn't interesting unless he wins.
Totally get that's step one, of course, win. But are you talking to potential members of cabinet, for example? And if you want to name any names, we're all ears.
No, I'm not look, of course I'm talking to everybody.
So Tropical Storm Francine moving northeast toward the Louisiana coast, according to NHC. Life-threatening storm surge and hurricane-force winds are expected to begin in Louisiana this afternoon.
Leaders, both who've served in the government before and who hope to serve this time, and really set that all up so when he's won, then he can come in and take a look and build a great government. My job is to build a mosaic, and then he will be, of course, the commander-in-chief. And the chief is, let's design and build the government that is the strongest it possibly can. I think it's incredible that I get to play this role for him. It is the most exciting and most fun. I mean, I'm having a great time of it because I'm just helping him in a deep, respectful way. And it's going to be an amazing administration, but he's got to win first.
Are you worried, Howard, that if he loses, it'll be, as he's said on social media, a bloodbath? I mean, he said yesterday he had nothing to do with January 6th, but he clearly was encouraging all of his supporters to come and then go to the Capitol. His praise for Viktor Orban, his love of these big political rallies. Doesn't it concern you that
you gotta stop? You gotta stop. This
does it not concern you?
You know, he said there'll be a bloodbath in the auto industry if they keep the NAFTA deal working and they let China build cars in Mexico and import them. You know that's what he said. So this concept, and the other concept that really made me unhappy was when Kamala Harris said that January 6th was the worst thing that happened to the country since the Civil War. See, today is 9/11.
I think the worst attack on the Capitol is what she said.
Was different.
The worst attack on the Capitol.
Well, but the Pentagon. The Pentagon was a worse attack on the Capitol. So, I mean, come on. Stop the rhetoric of the nonsense. okay? In the debate, they could do that stuff. That's rhetoric and nonsense. When you have me on 9/11, let's just stay focused on 9/11, the events that what happened 23 years ago, the attack on America. We've got to get rid of jihad. We all agree we've got to get rid of jihad, right? I'm worried about all these people coming into this country because I'm afraid terrorists have come into this country and they're going to do it to us again. And I never want any family to have to live through what I lived through. I lost my brother Gary 23 years ago. He was 36. My best friend Doug. And if you could imagine, you look behind me at this trading floor, imagine them all being killed, because that's what happened 23 years ago. It'll crush your heart. It'll crush your soul. And to me, you know, that's the most important thing about today. The most important thing about today is remembering these people, caring for their families, and making sure America stays strong and crushes terrorism around the world so no family has to have to go through what we're going through.
Howard, before we let you go here, you know, you have pointed to an active trading desk very full of people. You've talked earlier in this interview about how you've been hiring more, you have been building. There's another moment coming up for you that I know that you are very much looking forward to. That is the launch of your new futures exchange with the backing from a lot of Wall Street giants. How is that going? What can you expect from day one? And are you concerned at all around any of the regulatory environment around it, given some of the clearing questions around London?
Okay, so Shonali, because I'm on your show, I'm going to tell you, we are going to open our futures exchange on September 23rd. So the announcement of that was right here, right now, on your show. So we're opening our futures exchange, FMX, on September 23rd. And we are backed by the 10 largest trading firms in the world. It starts with JP Morgan and Citibank and Bank of America and Barclays and Wells and Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, and then Citadel, you all know, and then Jump and Tower, two firms you may not know, but they are the largest futures traders in the world. We're going to do rates futures, which is interest rate swap futures, which are called SOFR futures, and U.S. Treasury futures. We're going to start with SOFR futures, and that's going to start on September 23rd. And then in the first quarter of 2025, we're going to roll out Treasury futures, and we are going to create a break in the monopoly built by the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. And it is so fun and so exciting. And you are right. I am completely jazzed about FMX. So FMX is owned by this company, BGC, which is the largest wholesale financial service company in the world. So we broker everything in the world that doesn't trade on an exchange. And on September 23rd, we open our fully approved CFTC Futures Exchange, backed by the 10 greatest trading firms in the world. And I think we're going to bring competition to the market. And I am jazzed.
All right, you heard it here first, September 23rd. Of course, FMX opens for business. Howard, we look forward to that launch, and we really appreciate your time today, of course. That is Howard Lutnick, Chairman and CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald and the BGC Group. This is Bloomberg.
Fixed income fix. Watch Bloomberg Real Yield every Friday right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Good morning from our world headquarters in New York. I'm Menace Credit.
And I'm Danny Berger. Let's set your agenda.
Bloomberg Brief delivers the market news, data, and analysis you need live every weekday at 5 a.m. Eastern. Bloomberg. Context changes everything. The top names at Jackson Hole are on Bloomberg.
We need to start moving rates down, no question about it. 25, 50, that doesn't matter so much as commit to a process. Be methodical about the process. So don't just stop and start. Don't just do a large decrease and then stop and then start again. Just start a process and keep it moving.
Nobody covers Jackson Hole like Bloomberg. Context changes everything. world with unmatched reach and resources. From more than 120 countries, the moment news breaks 24 hours a day. Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Open Interest. Let's get a check on these markets with, of course, the S&P 500 trading at session lows. We'll do that with Abigail Doolittle.
It is pretty brutal, Katie. Take a look at the S&P 500 E-mini futures overnight down slightly, holding flat. We even had a little bit of a positive trade today, but now, as you mentioned, at session lows down 1.6%. Now, from a superlative standpoint, it doesn't go back that very far, only because we've been in this bearish near-term stretch. It's the worst day since September 6th, ever since the last top back in earlier this year. It's been downward today. Adding to that, the S&P 500 futures now down on their 100-day moving average, telling you that the near-term buyers, they are out. Take a look at the Dow, the NASDAQ 100, the Russell 2000, and then the KBW Bank Index. There's really nowhere to hide. From a what standpoint, a fundamental standpoint, there are so many different things that you could point to. Post-debate, the uncertainty of the election. You could also point to the comments out of JP Morgan yesterday in terms of net interest income, really signaling the signs of the consumer that were confirmed by Ally Financial. Delinquencies on auto loans. The consumer, of course, 66% of GDP. I would argue there's one last factor here, though, as well, Matt. Let's take a look at oil, because oil today, last time I looked at least, things are moving quickly. This might have changed, is slightly higher, but yesterday back down. WTI crude at 65. So this is a year-to-date chart. In blue, we have oil. In white, we have the XLE, or that spider, that energy spider. Right now, though, take a look at oil, down 8% on the year. There's a gap, but you can see that stocks and oil really trade pretty closely together, both risk assets. I would say that oil suggests that there's probably more downside. There's lots of signals around this out there, but I would suggest that oil, Matt, is saying that stocks, the XLE in particular, likely to go lower. Oil itself likely to go lower, which would confirm some of these mixed to possibly even negative tells that we're receiving right now on the state of the economy and the consumer here in the U.S.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting to see six handles on the crudes. I mean, they are up a little bit, but the global benchmark Brent crude is trading for less than $70 a barrel. WTI down under 66, as you just saw. Abigail Doolittle, thanks very much for that. Now let's get more on the inflation data that we saw. We're joined by Michael McKee, Bloomberg's chief international economics and policy correspondent, and the drop in oil, the drop in food prices that we've seen at the grocery store, that doesn't play into the core number, so that's why we saw it a little bit hotter at 0.3% month over month.
Well, the energy services are part of the core, but you're right, the drop in oil prices isn't going to make a difference, but it will down the road. And gasoline prices will make a difference in the headline down the road once they get incorporated into the September figures.
And the headline was 2.5% year over year.
Yeah,
so
energy has been dropping significantly. I think it was an 8% decline in the CPI today from the prior month. So that's not an issue really anymore, and neither is food. Food prices have flattened out. It's been the weird categories that have been going up and down, like airfares, and of course housing, that made the difference.
Yeah, well, in the minute we have left with you, I mean, we were talking to Omer Sharif about the real feel of inflation, because all these categories, it's really mixed. You do have food costs flat, but you have airfares and housing costs higher. I mean, for the average consumer, inflation obviously is still a huge problem.
Although you don't buy a house every day, you don't buy a car every day. Everybody's experience with inflation is different, and that's why it's a little bit hard to say these are cost of living indexes, because everybody buys different things. And so you just have to keep an eye sort of on the trend here. And the trend is good. On a 3-month basis, we're really seeing inflation below 2% for the CPI.
All right, Mike McKee, thanks so much. And you know where the trend isn't good? That's in the markets right now. You take a look at the S&P 500, and boy, it is a wipeout. The S&P 500 currently down about 1.6%. Big tech, no haven today, down 1.6% as well. Had been resilient earlier in the session. Not so much right now. And then you take a look at the small caps, really bearing the brunt of the selling, down 1.8%. But it's everywhere, guys. Every major sector is down.
down, led by financials, consumer, and energy. But to your point, you are not seeing any havens here.
Yeah, no, the sell-off just increased throughout the morning, throughout the program. Maybe it turns around in the afternoon. Stick with us through the close. Coming up tomorrow on Open Interest, iCapital Chief Investment Strategist Anastasio Amoroso joins us. This is Bloomberg.
In this facility, which is part of your $2 billion investment in the last 2 years, it's a massive amount.
Yes, because we focused a lot on automation and upgrading our quality standards so that we can adhere to the US FDA and European standards, because some of our vaccines now are going even to the West, which is a fundamental shift in our strategy, from back in the day when my father started the business, where we were predominantly in India and the developing
India-centric, now you're more global.
Yes.
So you're about 8,000 strong in this facility? All Indian nationals?
Mostly Indian, yes. I would say 99% of talent that we've trained overseas and in India. We have our own internal skill building center where we train on-site.
Serum started with just producing vaccine for tetanus, but it's producing a lot more vaccines now. What is the next big thing you think?
A global pandemic flu vaccine is something that we're working on, and I think the world will need that. Not only for the annual flu cases, but God forbid there's a flu pandemic. I think we are very well poised to make 1.5, 2 billion doses and roll it out very quickly to protect the world. And we have, of course, the other vaccines, as we talked about, HPV and malaria, that we've just launched, and we're going to scale that up as well.
Innovation, money, and power collide in Silicon Valley and beyond. This is Bloomberg Technology with Caroline Hyde and Ed Ludlow.
Live from New York and San Francisco, this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump squaring off in their first presidential debate. We talk the tech angles.
And the crypto sector nursing declines as betting markets reveal new momentum for the vice president. Markets react to the debate.
And Amazon bets big on Britain, looking to expand its cloud business with a $10.4 billion UK investment plan. But first, as markets sink, let's get straight to the first US presidential debate that saw former President Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris trading blows on the handling of America's semiconductor industry and the future of AI.
Well, let's be clear that the Trump administration resulted in a trade deficit, one of the highest we've ever seen in the history of America. He invited trade wars. You want to talk about his deal with China? What he ended up doing is, under Donald Trump's presidency, he ended up selling American chips to China to help them improve and modernize their military.
First of all, they bought their chips from Taiwan. We hardly make chips anymore because of philosophies like they have and policies like they have. I don't say her because she has no policy. Everything that she believed 3 years ago and 4 years ago is out the window. She's going to my philosophy now. In fact, I was going to send her a MAGA hat.
Bloomberg's David Gura is in Philadelphia. You were there for the live action, David. We focused on the tech angles, but what did you draw from the debate?
Well, I'll go back to what you just played there. I mean, I think that was a more robust exchange on policy than we saw on many of the topics that were covered during the course of that debate. So there were questions about former President Trump's tariffs policy. And of course, he's doubled down, saying that he's going to impose more blanket tariffs, not just on China, but on Mexico as well, other countries. So I thought that that was kind of an illuminating moment, and something that Vice President Harris then spoke about afterward were the investments that the Biden administration has made in trying to boost semiconductor production here in the United States during this administration. And also noting the fact that when you look at tariffs and tariffs that have been levied on China when it comes to semiconductors, in fact, it has been the Biden-Harris administration that has elevated them even more. So, look, this was more than 90 minutes long. It went longer than we thought it would go. There's a little policy at the beginning, but we saw diversions from that pretty quickly. And I think, to the degree to which economics was discussed, trade was one moment again where I thought there was at least some robust, spirited back and forth between these two candidates, getting to some substance on that issue, guys.
Harris kept in line with the administration's policy that everything to do with chips from a restriction standpoint is in the interest of national security. And then Trump went after the track record, right? What they did or didn't do over the last 4 years. It's hard to see where in aggregate we've landed, David. Look at social media and the reporting on the Bloomberg terminal. What is the net result of that debate last night?
Well, I go back to what I heard from Governor Gavin Newsom of California before this debate. I said, how pivotal is it? How important is it? What difference could this make? And he said, think of it like World War I, where it's going to be something determined by inches, not anything more than that. This is such an incredibly close race between these two candidates. It would be folly to think that a good performance in that debate would have a sizable impact in raising a candidate's stature in the polls. Conversely, if there were a bad performance, that would have a negative effect, dramatically negative effect on those polls as well. I think you're right. I mean, you look ahead here, we've got fewer than 60 days until this election. Both of these candidates, I think, rightly recognize this is going to be a very hard-fought campaign and one that's going to be decided fundamentally by just a few thousand voters. I mean, it's rather extraordinary to say when you look at the whole population of this country and the voting electorate. We talk about swing states. It's more granular than that, of course. You all know that as well. We're talking about districts in particular. So I think what we're going to see is an effort to capitalize on whatever momentum these candidates got last night, carry that onto the campaign trail. Vice President Harris going down to North Carolina tomorrow, then back up to Pennsylvania, those two swing states over the course of this week. Donald Trump making the pilgrimage out to California for a press conference at the end of the week, going to Nevada and Arizona as well. So they're going to be back on the trail here, trying to talk their book, trying to do all they can to woo those undecided voters. Again, a very small sliver of the U.S. electorate.
And of those voters, Taylor Swift now coming out endorsing Kamala Harris, which we'll get to in more detail later in the program. David Gura on the ground, thank you very much. Let's continue with the market's reaction to last night's debate. Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle with us, and I think this is cross-asset. What are you seeing?
It is certainly cross-asset, and it's interesting right now. Stocks down broadly, the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ down more than 1%. I think that has less to do with the debate and has more to do with other factors of uncertainty relative to the reaction to the debate. I would say right now, DJT is one of the better signals in terms of what investors saw, with the stock down about 15%, the worst day since April. So I would say this is clearly a vote away from the Trump trade, if you will, and one way that the markets are backing VP Kamala Harris. In fact, if we take a look at the betting odds, just yesterday, both candidates had been at 52% apiece. This after former President Donald Trump, right when Kamala Harris got into the race, led her by, let's call it 20%. She then led Donald Trump by about 12 to 15%. But again, yesterday, going into that debate, 52% apiece. Now the spread 5 to 7% apart in favor of VP Harris. So this is another way markets are telling you that they thought that Kamala Harris's performance was at least stronger, and or they think that she will in fact be elected in November. In fact, if we dig in just a little bit deeper and we take a look at what could be a Harris trade, which would be green green energy. It would be healthcare that goes toward Medicare, Medicaid, along with the home builders. It's interesting. That's one area that is actually not favoring her right now. One of her policies, to the best that we know, is a $25,000 tax credit, down payment for first-time home builders. Some of the home builders that are geared toward those early home builders or home buyers, they are down today, but those other areas are higher. And then finally, if we round it out with a look at crypto, clearly Donald Trump is in favor of crypto. Actually, this is the VIX, so we do have the VIX signaling overall, Caroline, the idea of risk off rising, and that's what crypto would signal too. It's down about 3% on the day. If you look at crypto as another way of looking at as a tell on, risk off, it's being down confirms the VIX, and stocks down confirms the VIX higher and stocks down, that investors are a little bit uncertain. But overall, the debate right now signals that investors are a little bit more favorable, I would argue, toward VP Harris, and that uncertainty into November, well, it's rising.
Abigail Doolittle, with a wrap-up, we thank you. There's also, of course, the macro picture at play with inflation print today and a risk-off tone. Let's dig in with Sarah Malik, Head of Equities and Fixed Income at Chief Investment Officer over at Nuveen. Sarah, great to have you in the studio.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I mean, when one factors in political concerns or at least uncertainty, and then you have the uncertainty of what inflation is doing, what the Fed's going to do, how do you measure up those risks?
I think, there's three factors driving the markets right now. First is seasonality. Second, of course, is the election, and then the economy. So second half of September, for the past 4 years in a row, on average, tends to be the worst period for the markets for the year. So we're just approaching that, and look where we already are. The election, I think, creating some uncertainty, mostly around expiration of tax cuts. And what will that mean in terms of inflation? Could cost up to $4.6 trillion to renew those for whichever candidate wins the election. But I think the real main event is the economy. Inflation coming out today higher than expected with CPI driven by shelter. People are worried that the economy is slowing and inflation isn't slowing fast enough. It holds the Fed back. I think we get 25 basis points this month for a cut. And then we may have a slow start to Fed cuts if inflation remains sticky. And that is concerning because economic data is slowly moving to the downside.
What does that mean, therefore, around one's portfolio? Diversification key, but people have been putting so much money into 7 key names when it comes to technology. Does tech continue to outperform?
I think tech will outperform as rate cuts accelerate. We can break down tech into 3 buckets: semiconductors, software, and mega caps. So software has been the laggard year to date. That's where we're most interested. We think there's some attractive names there. It's under-owned by portfolio managers. Market-leading companies like Microsoft and Salesforce. Salesforce in particular looks kind of cheap on a valuation basis. People could, as rate cuts happen, could start spending more on their products. Semiconductors, probably a little more downside to go. In a typical downturn, that segment goes down 30 to 40%. We are not there yet. So I think semis, as we approach 2025, we could see an inflection point, as 2025 could be when people start a replacement cycle post-COVID. And then mega cap, you need to be selective. We have Meta and NVIDIA dominating returns this year. I think people are waiting to see monetization of artificial intelligence for some of those companies, return on investment. So mega cap, you need to be selective. A company we like is Apple, where it's a low capex play for them to get AI into their phones. That iPhone replacement cycle is slowly starting this year. We'll pick up next year as more AIs into those phones. I think Apple is the attractive play in mega cap.
Sarah, do those themes you've outlined continue through the second half of the year into next year, irrespective of the outcome of the election? I'm particularly thinking about the mega caps and your commentary on the chip sector.
I think, first of all, on a macro basis, inflation and the economy will continue to be themes throughout this year. I think for semiconductors, the biggest reason for them to inflect will be a replacement cycle for the stocks. Whether we're manufacturing and global supply chains, onshoring versus offshoring could be somewhat of a bigger issue depending on which candidate wins. Software, I think, is more of a rate play, and as companies start to spend more on software and the stocks evaluation. So I think mostly it's the fundamentals that stay intact, and which candidate wins the election doesn't have a huge impact on them, but it could have somewhat, because we also have to worry about regulations and the degree of regulations on some of these mega cap companies.
Sarah, I sat on my sofa like everyone around the country hoping that AI would come up in the debate. The question for markets is, how much longer does this trend have to run? Listen to what Mike Wilson said on Bloomberg Television earlier today.
We just got overcooked on the whole AI theme. It doesn't mean it's over. We've written about this extensively. Like, we're not believers that this is going to change productivity materially in the short term. That's a long-term story.
And that's why I asked you about the election. Does it happen irrespective of the outcome? Do you agree that this AI trade's overcooked right now?
Well, it definitely became overcrowded from an investment point of view. And with any new structural change in the technology landscape, like artificial intelligence, which I think is here to stay, there's going to be fits and starts. And what people have been worrying about since the July 10th peak is where are the signs of monetization and what is the return on investment on this tens of billions of AI investments that technology companies have made and that companies are making in order to improve their revenue growth and improve their efficiencies and productivity. That's what we're not seeing yet. So I think we are in a bit of a plateau or a pause for these stocks until we start to see more clear signs of what it really means and the impact on businesses. Now, not surprisingly, consumer technology companies are seeing positive impacts from AI, like Meta with its targeting ads on Instagram, and also Amazon, which is targeting what people more efficiently should be buying. But in other areas like manufacturing companies, we're not seeing the yield increases yet. And I think that's the other non-tech areas of the economies where we want to see that impact of artificial intelligence.
Sarah Malik, so good to have you here from Nuveen. We appreciate it. Coming up, Sarah mentions Amazon. We're going to dig in as it continues to expand its cloud business in the United Kingdom. More details next. This is Bloomberg Technology.
Our principles, our policies in support of the Palestinian people will never change. Our policy in having a two-state solution will never change, and nothing will compromise it. And as long as we are, having the capability to be helpful, we will do it. We did that between Afghanistan, between Taliban and the US. We did that between different parties in Lebanon, in Sudan, and others. And that's basically the core of our foreign policy. It's been built based on mediation, on trying to help in resolving conflicts between the parties. There are countries or people might not like it, but we don't ask everyone to like it, just to understand it.
There is this real momentum from Wall Street. We are basically deep in the European earnings season.
Take a look at how we're faring when it comes to Asian markets.
Bloomberg loves earnings.
I know it's like your Super Bowl, right?
I can't wait. It's like opening presents in the morning.
All right, it will be exciting.
Nobody covers earnings like Bloomberg.
Amazon says it would spend $10.5 billion in the UK to grow its cloud business, adding to a string of recent expansion moves in Europe and giving Britain's new Labour government a welcome investment boost. Bloomberg's Matt Day, who covers Amazon, joins us now from Seattle. And Matt, you and I have covered many of these deals, right? I think about Virginia, where AWS in particular pledges, I think it's $35 billion through 2040. But it's still a significant bet on Amazon's footprint in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, it is, and it's about in line with what they should be spending there. You look at the UK chunk of sales for Amazon. This probably makes sense within the context of Amazon's CapEx because they are spending just a ton on data centers, as you mentioned. This year alone, we've had announcements: Saudi Arabia, Mexico, in Europe, in Germany, and in Spain, and now United Kingdom. Just a kind of a full force of AWS saying they're going to stay relevant in the cloud market by expanding more than anybody else.
Yeah, give us context to the race here, the need for compute to satisfy demand.
So it's at least two separate things. One is sort of the ongoing move to the cloud, companies unplugging their data centers in favor of rented computing power. That's Amazon, that's Microsoft, that's Google. You've also had this AI cocktail thrown in there where folks have just had to ramp up their budgets to afford these pricey chips, to afford the cooling that makes them happen. And then just on top of that, power is scarce just about everywhere you look. So there's a real kind of land grab on of big cloud companies to build new campuses, to expand kind of as quick as they can to meet this new emerging demand.
Matt, Caroline and I will spare you from the UK political component of this story, although the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, wasting no time to kind of point out this is a big win for UK PLC. The business is interesting. Every time we talk about Amazon or AWS's footprint in Europe on this program, I note that quite a lot of Amazon staff will engage on LinkedIn. There's a lot of them there. But how does it compare to their presence in North America and elsewhere?
Well, their biggest hubs are in North America, right? That's where the majority of their data center investment over time has been. But they are going more international, and they are going into sort of smaller and smaller markets. If you roll back the clock many years, it used to be they invested in kind of big centralized data center locations. I believe that was outside of Paris in the EU, and then slowly over time they've kind of gone down and said, listen, not only do we need points of presence in local markets, but we need to spend, billions of dollars in local markets to take advantage of the opportunities there to be close to just the big corporates who are demanding cloud computing.
What about taking advantage of benefits that certain governments offer? Is that part of the game?
It is. I think Amazon, certainly wants any incentives that are on offer wherever they go. But I'm not sure it's necessarily the driving force. If you listen to Amazon's critics, they will say, listen, if you map their data centers, it just maps out to where their customers are, right? So certainly policy would play a role. I'm just not sure the market thinks it's a very big one.
Matt Day, great to have the expertise. Thank you. Coming up, we'll be joined by Corti CEO Andreas Cleve to discuss how, guess what, artificial intelligence, well, it's transforming the healthcare sector. That's next. This is Bloomberg Technology.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute technology news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Annabelle Drawlers in Taipei, and this is Bloomberg.
As we spend some time here on the broader presidential race.
Let's focus in on European politics.
Makes you wonder how politics might play out.
Asia is at the forefront of some of the world's biggest stories. I'm Sherrian in Tokyo.
And I'm Heidi Stroud-Watts here in Sydney, where the trading day begins. We're here in the center of all the action to get you set up with the numbers, news, and knowledge you need for the day ahead.
The demand is indeed recovering. We've been waiting for this moment.
The opportunity of a century.
Join us on Bloomberg The Asia Trade. Weekdays only on Bloomberg TV. Context changes everything.
From the world of politics to the world of business, Joe Matthew and Keely Lines deliver news, insight, and analysis live 2 times a day every trading day. Balance of Power at 1 and 5 Eastern, only on Bloomberg.
On today's AI in Action, we are taking a look at Corti. It's a global AI engine designed for healthcare, with AI that not only takes practitioner notes, but it helps with quality assurance, with journals, with prompts, and helps document every patient interaction. Now, the company just announced the hire of former Microsoft and Philips executives to help lead the company's expansion here in the United States. Corti CEO Andreas Cleve joins us now. Why is the US such a focus?
It's the most important healthcare market in the world.
It's where I myself live, and I'm a patient. And it's a place we feel very excited to work in, as some of the best providers and payers are there. And I think they'll be the cornerstone of building the most important solutions for healthcare.
What do you offer those practitioners, those experts? Because we're all trying to find out what the return on AI investment is. What do you offer healthcare practitioners?
Actual time back. And that's a promise that's been promised a lot of times. And having been here for a while, so we were founded as a research company back in 2016 to prove we could research and find ways of delivering safe and trustworthy AI. And that's exactly what we give today to providers. We have a solution you can build into whatever tool or application you use. And here our real-time AI actually helps deliver on some of these promises by doing medical coding. We do summaries, we do documentation, and in the end help them carve back some of that time lost to administration.
Andreas, a startup founded in 2016 is a little bit refreshing, actually. There have been many new companies formed in the last 2 years in this area. So in that time, you've built up data, 100 million customer interactions. What's the benefit that the health system gets from those interactions now?
Yeah, I am excited as an entrepreneur to see so much AI being adopted. But I am still astounded by the amount of AI that's being deployed in healthcare today that isn't built for healthcare. So we see a lot of models today who are as good as doing haiku or finding a great kitchen recipe as they are at doing healthcare AI. And what we're offering is obviously an AI that's solely built for healthcare. We have been here for a while, researching on this, publishing on this, and partnering with some of the best providers to build an AI that is only tuned to one thing, and that is listen to healthcare providers and payers and actually deliver automations and augmentations that really work.
The difficulty in this country is insurance and established healthcare systems. Have you been able to navigate that?
I think the way we think about it a lot is to ensure that we don't just come with yet another application. So what we want to come with is a technology that you build into whatever you use already today, and that can be used both by payers and providers. So today we're lucky that more than 100,000 patient interactions are flowing through Cordy across all 50 states in the US. And ultimately, I just heard this from a doctor the other day, it actually helps them ensure that they're more on point, also in handing over patients, data, or documentation between, let's say, a payer and provider.
Let's exactly talk about patient data. There's a lot of anxiety about it running through various people's hands, Andreas. How are you ensuring the security?
So we are originally a company from Denmark in the cold north in Scandinavia in Europe. So in our DNA is compliance. We are from the most regulated part of the global healthcare system, and also known to be one of the best healthcare systems. And we have been lucky enough to be partnering with the European Union and their legislative arm when they wrote the AI Act. And we've been lucky enough to work with them on GDPR. So into the engine of Cordy and all the technology we've built, compliance and data safety is among them. And that means that we are not taking data, we are not appropriating data, we're not misusing data, as we come from a market that's driven by patients, and those patients, they give each other healthcare for free. And we really have an ethos of ensuring that patients come first. And that's, I think, very core to what we believe in.
Andreas, the most recent piece of news for you is all of the sort of top talent you've been hiring from both tech and healthcare. How difficult and how expensive was that?
Yeah, it's definitely been a big challenge. I think there's a lot of hype around AI startups, but I think we've been lucky to see some of the best talents in healthcare, meeting customers, providers, payers all the time, who really want to get on this AI journey, but they've maybe not yet found a provider that actually was trustworthy. So we've been lucky enough to show them that, and luckily we keep hearing that from patients and providers who start using it, that they actually see the outcomes they want. And I think that entices a lot of the sort of the titans of our industry to come and see if it's for real, and luckily when they see it, they actually want to join.
Cordy CEO Andreas Cleve, great to have you on the program. Thank you very much. Let's get to some other news in talking tech. And first up, India Prime Minister Narendra Modi aims to bolster its electronics sector, targeting $500 billion by the end of the decade. This as India tries to woo more chip makers into the country, already approving $15 billion worth of semiconductor investments so far. Plus, London-based fintech firm Revolut topped its rivals in complaints related to authorized push payment scams, where criminals criminals trick people into sending money to an account outside their control. A UK regulator has come up with a potential plan that would require firms to reimburse fraud victims within 5 days, putting pressure on financial institutions to improve scam concerns. And Laser Tech remains hopeful of sustained growth. The Japanese firm sees double-digit annual revenue growth for the next few years, driven by AI demand. Laser Tech holds 100% market share in machines that verify chip designs. Its tools are used by chip makers like TSMC, Intel, and Samsung. Now, coming up, really important conversation. Waymo making some progress in the world of autonomous ride-hailing. We do speak with the CEO, Takeda Marikana, coming up next. Stay tuned. From New York City and San Francisco, this is Bloomberg Technology.
We want to make sure that we're exposed to categories that continue to be relevant to consumers, that we're positioned in categories where we have a competitive right to win.
By strategically adding and shedding assets, General Mills has turned over about 20% of its net sales base in the last 6 years. It's dramatically expanded its pet food platform, starting with the purchase of Blue Buffalo pet products in 2018. That expansion dovetailed with a boom in demand.
Pet in the U.S., pet feeding and treating, is a $50 billion category. It's almost 5 times the size of a category like cereal.
Is this the future of the company? I mean, we so much associate General Mills with breakfast and cereals, human breakfast and human cereals. Are we now going to be thinking about General Mills much more as a pet food company?
I think you'll be thinking about General Mills as a food company where we treat all the members of the family like family.
The humanization of pets is actually the biggest driver of pet food and pet treating growth. It has derivatives in not only feeding, which is the core thing that most households where most of the dollars go against the pet, but treating, and then you start to branch out to things like vitamins and minerals and supplements.
People really love their pets. They want to take care of their pets like they do their family, and it really is a global phenomenon. That's why we recently entered the China market with Blue Buffalo. That's why we bought Edgar & Cooper recently in Europe, because we see the same kinds of trends that have played out here in the U.S. playing out all over the world.
Good morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Welcome back to the opening trade.
This is Bloomberg Technology.
This is the Asia trade.
You're watching the close.
Welcome to Balance of Power.
This is Bloomberg. It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. We'll show you what's happening in ETFs like no one else. Bloomberg ETF IQ, Monday on Bloomberg.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Caroline Hyde in New York.
And I'm Ed Ludlow in San Francisco.
Quick check on these markets that have been under pressure post the CPI print, of course, Ed. Look, we've got a bit of risk aversion creeping into the markets. We're off of our lows, but still the NASDAQ 100 is dragged on by about 0.9%. We seem to see a slight move to the havens that is the bond market. Yields currently flat. We had seen more of a bid a little bit earlier in trading. Look, but the overall question is, can the Fed be cutting to the whacking proportion of a 50 basis point as soon as September? Most now dialing that back to a 25 basis point expectation. Therefore, maybe just wind coming out of some of these more risk-on trades. I talk of that within the spectrum of Bitcoin. We're off by more than 2%. But of course, maybe that's a political reflection of the debate of yesterday when, former President Trump is deemed a more crypto-pro candidate, and perhaps maybe the market feeling his performance was lackluster versus that of VP Harris. Let's move on and have a look at what the individual movers are looking like in terms of technology. Look, the bid up in certain solar names, more than 9% higher for First Solar. That, again, being deemed perhaps a fallout of what was a strong performance by VP Harris yesterday. I'm also looking at what's happening with ARM Holding, once again rising some 3%. This is more back to its V9 chip design. Maybe that's being integrated into the new Apple chip, and really Morgan Stanley once again singling this name out as one of its best forward focuses for sort of edge AI, as they're calling it. And Tesla, look, biggest points drag on the NASDAQ, wanted to call it out, more than 2.5% lower, Ed. What are you looking at?
Waymo, the autonomous driving arm of Google parent Alphabet, has been making some progress of late. Autonomous ride-hailing has hit more than 100,000 weekly paid rides across Waymo's first markets. And the company's also published new data showing it's done 22 million rider-only miles to date with no one in the driver's seat. Joining us to discuss, Waymo co-CEO Takeda Marukana, who last week was also named in Time's 100 most influential in AI list for 2024. Good morning to you, Takeda. When we said you were coming on the show, lots of people have very sort of granular questions about the paid rides. So let's start there. You know, what is the average distance taken, the average fare per ride, and a bit more about the economics of what you've achieved?
Yeah, thank you so much, Ed, for having me. And I would love to hear more about your experience, because I've been watching your social engagement like so many of our riders. So you said it, you know, we've reached over 100,000 rides per week across San Francisco, Phoenix, and Los Angeles. The distances that people travel and how they're using the service vary wildly between those locations. In San Francisco, we're finding that like 36% of people are actually using the service to connect with transit, you know, which is really surprising for us. So that's like, depending on where they are in the city, it could be like about a 3-mile ride to get to a transit or to get to work. Other people are using it to run errands and to doctor's appointments. So it really depends. And when you talk about the economics, you know, we're a premium service. And so people are, you know, paying for the consistency and the safety of the Waymo driver in the Waymo One service.
Under the sort of co-CEO model, you're really focused on the commercialization of what Waymo's been doing for quite a long time. And just going back to what you just said, yeah, I use Waymo often. I also use Tesla's FSD supervised and was using Cruise. And, you know, the experience is interesting, but I'm trying to think about how I would use it in the course of my normal life. And for me, SFO is a big thing. So when am I going to be able to go down to SFO in a Waymo from here on Pier 3 Embarcadero? And what's the progress you're making there?
Yeah, so, you know, when we launched in Phoenix, one of the early engagements was with the Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport. And so now we offer 24/7 pickup at the curbside there. You know, it's a process. We were the first autonomous vehicle company to receive FAA approval to be able to do that kind of pickup. And so we're deeply engaged with SFO officials so that we can do exactly that kind of pickup. The other thing that we're also deeply engaged in with our employees right now is fully autonomous rides on freeways, because, you know, people want to take trips to and from the airport and they want to do it on freeways. And so we have that going in Phoenix. We have it also in San Francisco with our employees right now. And both of those are really critical unlocks for us. And we're really focused on it right now. And, you know, doing everything with safety at the center of how we move. It's iterative, it's deliberate, and it takes what it takes to get it right.
Let's dwell on that safety, Takeda, and thank you for joining us today. Because S&P actually, kudos to you, calling out Waymo as the front runner in the field of AVs in the United States. But they do say challenges remain, including an ongoing investigation from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. How are you discussing that? How are you looking at your safety data?
So we're really, really proud. I mean, we, you know, founded in 2009 as the Google Self-Driving Car Project. Our company culture is built around safety, and it's built around the transparency of our safety. You know, there's not one measure of safety, so we've built a lot of measures and a lot of transparency. And last week, we launched the Safety Hub, and we're the only company that's sort of putting all of our data out there for academics, the media, everyone to engage with it. and understand why it is that we know that we are, through the data, improving road safety. You just had some of the stats up, right? Like reducing the number of airbag deployments, injury-causing crashes. I mean, this is why we exist, right? Level 4 technology should make the road safer for humans, for pedestrians, for cyclists, vulnerable road users, and we're showing that that's the case. But we're still, with the NHTSA investigation, demonstrating that, engaging at every level of government is what you have to do when you're the first to do this. No one's reached this level of scale, and so we understand NHTSA has a role to play, and we also have a role to play in being very transparent.
And for that, you need money, and luckily you got a large amount of it, $5 billion coming from Alphabet. Just tell us about the investment needs, the focus of that. S&P again calling out the need for this sort of capital investment to drive the US forward.
Yeah, so super fortunate to be backed by Alphabet as well as our other external investors. We're laser focused on scaling this technology. And so that investment, while it's a big number, doesn't represent a significant growth in our overall trajectory because we've been very diligent about bringing down our cost structure over time. And so you saw us in the last couple of weeks introduce our 6th generation driver. When you see us introducing a new technology or a new approach to our go-to-market strategy, one of the things that you can think about is that's going to make scaling our business more efficient over time. And so that's what we're really focused on doing, and having the backing of Alphabet is a great, great place to be.
Takidra, what's your relationship like with Ruth Porat? I had my sort of final quarterly earnings call with her at the last call, and she's focused on other things now. How will you work together as she kind of transitions to a different function at Alphabet?
Yeah, so Ruth is going to remain involved, right? She's taking on this role as president and chief investment officer, and we are obviously a really important investment for Alphabet. And so she's been involved since I joined the company. She's a very, very ardent supporter of Waymo, and I look forward to continuing to work with her in this new capacity.
Takidra, as you know, I kind of have a hands-on experience of your competitive landscape. What do you make of sort of Tesla's strategy with robotaxi and a proprietary ride-hailing app? And also, why sort of is your approach different and going to succeed to them or to a Cruise, for example?
This sort of question of competitive landscape, I think, is so interesting because we're in the business of trying to make the road safer. And we're in the business of doing it in a way that takes the human out of the loop for 2 reasons. One is it expands the number of people who have access to mobility options, right? If you don't need a driver's license, if you don't have to sit behind the wheel, then Waymo's a perfect opportunity for you. And hopefully any level 4 system that actually makes, the road safer will be that. And so that's the way we think about it. And so when I think about some of the other approaches that people are taking, I think if you need a driver's license or if the human has to take over, it's just very different. And it's not, we're heads down, focused on our strategy, which is a level 4 technology.
Thank you for talking us through the strategy today. Waymo co-CEO Takidra Mawakana, we appreciate your time. Now coming up, we'll be joined by Liz Yang, head of growth at Azuki, for her take on the presidential debate's impact on crypto markets, what they're signaling. This is Bloomberg Technology.
Bloomberg Surveillance covers the latest in global markets and the political events that influence your world. Join Jonathan Farrell, Lisa Abramowitz, and Anne-Marie Hordern only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything. The top names at Jackson Hole are on Bloomberg.
I'd like to see us move toward a more real-time data set. So using new technologies, maybe some of the AI technologies, maybe we get better data as we move forward, but we've got to really focus on that with our economists and our analysts about, where's the data coming from and can we rely on it?
Nobody covers Jackson Hole like Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Do you think it'll be the case where someday you will be an investment committee or I'll be an investment committee and we just apply AI, decide whether it's a good deal or not, or we're not going to be there anytime soon?
I don't think we'll be there in the near term. And David, because, being on investment committees, there's the analytics of the math, there's the people, and then there's judgment. So analytics of the math, I think AI will help us get way more refined. Right now, we have analysts building models upon models. Our typical investment memo is 86 pages. So we could refine that down very, very seamlessly to pieces. The people aspect to it, to make a judgment call on, do I believe this entrepreneur is going to go the next mile? Do I believe that the background of the entrepreneur, who they are, what they stand for, their values, their family, that's the harder one. I think AI is going to take some time to get there. And then the final piece ends up being judgment. And I don't believe we've seen anything yet that gives us a sense of judgment that we're able to apply.
Welcome to the world of decentralized finance.
We thought we'd take a look at Bitcoin versus the S&P 500.
Bloomberg's covering all things crypto, the people.
A tectonic shift emanating from Washington.
It's really a tale of two cities in crypto.
Crypto shouldn't be partisan.
The transactions.
Really a record-breaking moment.
Crypto VC is back.
And the technology.
It's really the beginning of a global on-chain economy.
And if America doesn't embrace it, we're going to be left behind.
Bloomberg Crypto, Tuesdays, only on Bloomberg.
It's gone viral. Taylor Swift has endorsed Kamala Harris. She made the announcement just minutes after the debate of yesterday wrapped through a social media post, as you can see, featuring her cat, as she calls herself a childless cat lady. We understand the reference there. She says she is voting for Harris because, quote, she fights for the rights and causes I believe need a warrior to champion them. Bloomberg opinion, David Lee is with us now. Dave, it feels, though, that underlying all of this is artificial intelligence, and you point out in that piece.
Yes, I mean, this was the thing that Taylor Swift says kind of motivate her to speak out and publicly endorse the Harris campaign. I mean, she may have done it anyway, but she made a specific point of bringing this up in her post. She said there had been misinformation posted about her by Trump on Truth Social, suggesting that she had been, that she was endorsing him and that some of her fans were supporting him as well. And so what I think this kind of represents is, the first kind of major impact we've seen from the use of AI in an election. Now, we've heard researchers warn that deep fakes and other kind of misinformation using AI would perhaps influence voters. And this is kind of what's happened, although it's come from a rebuttal rather than the original content itself. And Taylor Swift's response is going to be seen by many more people than the original post by Trump.
As you point out in your opinion column, we can only speculate if Swift would have endorsed Harris had that fake endorsement not happened. But then there's like the Taylor Swift effect, right? And, you try and make sense of a presidential debate. What's your conclusion in the column about the impact Taylor Swift coming out and endorsing Kamala Harris will have on this election race? Opinion tech columnist Dave Lee, go.
Well, I think one of the things we've seen in the past when Taylor Swift has brought herself into politics, which we know she does very, very carefully and with a great deal of thought, is that what we typically see is voter registrations among young people, among young women in particular, tends to go up quite considerably. So I imagine we'd see that happen again here. There's questions of how much of that translates to people actually going to the polls, but put it this way, Taylor Swift's endorsement is certainly one you'd prefer to have than not have, right? So particularly when it's done in a way that is drawing attention to one of the major criticisms of Trump, which is that he, makes things up and puts them on his website.
Bloomberg opinions, Dave Lee, appreciate it. Go check out his column. Meanwhile, let's get to where other youthful voters have been looking, crypto, and more importantly, let's look at Bitcoin, because it is actually under some pressure today after the last 2 trading days off by 0.25%. call that CPI, but maybe also call it a reaction to the US presidential debate. Let's discuss with Liz Yang, she's head of growth at Treasury. And Liz, I'm really interested more broadly in how crypto is being used as a gauge for the former President Trump's performance or chances of being re-elected.
There are several different ways. So firstly, if you look at the price of Bitcoin, you can consider that as a proxy for how the crypto sector views Trump's chances of being elected in the upcoming presidential election. This is because Trump has come out as a staunchly pro-crypto candidate, forcing the Democrats' hand on the issue of crypto policy. Now, if you look at prediction markets like Polymarket, what's really, really fascinating is that almost in real time, viewers were able to track crypto sector sentiment around the timestamps of when each candidate came out with their respective arguments.
Liz, I was doing something similar last night because we'd reported on it. We said, okay, if you want to follow some sort of real-time sentiment, look at specific crypto assets that trade 24/7. What I couldn't work out was, is this just a clear situation where Trump is the crypto candidate and Harris is not, or there's just not a thorough understanding of policy for either candidate?
It's a really good question. So overall, when you take a look at markets like prediction markets, information is, of course, imperfect, but I think that's a reflection of the American populace at large in terms of how they vote. What I think is very powerful about tools like Polymarket, other prediction markets, as well as political meme coins or politified coins, is that they're a way to be able to gauge the barometer in terms of sentiment. And I think that if you take a look at previous elections, there's been enormous appetite in terms of using statistics to track where sentiment's at. So for example, 538. And I see Polymarket and politified meme coins as a natural extension of this behavior.
Let's just talk about how the Trump campaign more broadly has embraced crypto. Non-fungible tokens, key, but also this Liberty Financial, World Liberty Financial, it seems to be a DeFi potential protocol, doesn't seem to be live yet, but being talked around, particularly by his sons. What do you make of that particular project?
I think Trump is trying to put his money where his mouth is, and he's trying to enter into these various different forays to show his dedication and interest in the crypto space.
Where do we go from here? I mean, there comes a point where the markets can continue doing what they're doing, be they prediction or a specific asset you track, or people look elsewhere. What's your kind of hunch in that respect?
So when it comes to tools like prediction markets and meme coins, I see this as a natural extension of behavior that actually started during the pandemic with Wall Street bets. And what happened during then is that because of the pandemic, people were starved for social contact with their friends and family, and they were able to form these bonds with other traders on such forums. So what it means is that for a lot of younger people, investing is not necessarily just about ROI. It's also about internet culture and memes and also entertainment as well as community. And where I see political meme coins coming out of this, or politified tokens, is that it really is a natural successor of this kind of trend. So with politified meme coins, it combines financial nihilism with political satire, with internet-grown culture, as well as entertainment. So really transforming how the younger generations, not only looking at investing, but participating in the political process.
Liz Yang, Head of Growth at Azuki and Kira Labs. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Now, coming up, Sony bets big on its loyal audience to pay a premium for its new PlayStation 5 Pro. Is that going to work? We'll discuss next. Kara, what are you looking at?
Oh, I'm talking gaming. I'm talking memes. I'm talking GameStop. We're off by almost 15%. Sales miss. We're getting fundamentals for this business. They're down at one point as much as 18%, but really second quarter sales that came in below consensus estimates. Company also filed to sell up to an extra 20 million shares. This is Bloomberg Technology.
Because I think one of the dirty little secrets of credit is that the businesses generally don't pay you back, right? The markets pay you back, M&A pays you back. So what is the most important thing is to always make sure that the borrower is worth more than the loan. And as long as the borrower is worth more than the loan, then it might be a rocky ride, but you're going to get your money back. And this world where there's these disruptive companies that have, let's call it 100, 200, 300 million of ARR, are looking to not raise equity capital because of the fact that they raised it in 2021 or 2022, and no one really wants a down round. But there's a lot of capacity in the capital structure to have, let's call it a structured solution. We think that there's a lot of opportunity with those businesses.
Morning from our world headquarters in New York, I'm Manus Cranny.
And I'm Danny Berger. Let's set your agenda.
Bloomberg Brief delivers the market news, data, and analysis you need live every weekday at 5 a.m. Eastern. Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Morning, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom McKenzie in London. These are the stories that set your agenda.
Taking you from the U.S. market's close to the overnight session in Asia. We'll walk you through what you need to know to kickstart the European trading day. Live from our European headquarters, we bring you the day's top market-moving stories, unmatched expert analysis, and on-the-ground reporting from across the continent. Tune in to Daybreak Europe, only on Bloomberg Television. Context changes everything.
Sony's PlayStation 5. It's got a refresh, and the company is debuting a new PS5 Pro, but it comes with a premium price tag. Bloomberg's Jason Schreier joins us for more. Whew, this caught people by surprise.
$700 for the PlayStation 5 Pro. There was a meme way back in the day when the PlayStation 3 was announced because they came up on stage and said that'll be $599 US. That was a whole meme, and now it's $100 more. So I guess the memes have to keep up with inflation too.
I was taken aback, Jason, because as you know, I'm a loyal, avid PlayStation user. It's my console of choice. But when you think about the console market as a whole, this is like PlayStation raising prices when the market's kind of going the other direction, right? Like kids today, apologies for the expression, but they're doing something different with gaming.
Yeah, it's funny. I think that if I can offer a few words in PlayStation's defense here, or at least trying to understand where they're coming from. So the PS5 Pro, this is not a new console. This is a model of the PlayStation 5 that will essentially play the same games at more vivid graphics, higher refresh rates, and better resolutions. Essentially, this thing is meant for tech aficionados, the same types of people who maybe bought an Apple Vision Pro or are getting a new phone every single year. So this is not meant for kids or the mass market. This is a model that is meant for people who have money to spend, who don't really care about price quite as much and just want the highest end gear. In fact, I saw a good stat here. This is from Matt Piscatella, an analyst for Circana, and he said that the PS4 Pro, which was a refresh of the PlayStation 4, the last generation console, accounted for 13% of total lifetime PS4 units. So not a significant amount, and I expect this will play a similar role in the market.
Talk to me about a lack of disk drive, Jason.
Yeah, man, I had a conversation not too long ago at a party in LA where I was talking to an executive for one of these big console companies, and I was like, it's funny, the market is moving to digital pretty quickly. And he was like, no, Jason, it's already there. A very large percent of customers are buying their games digitally these days, or not even bothering with discs. You guys are about to talk about GameStop. That is why they've been on the downswing for a long time. And so I think Sony sees the disk drive as an accessory, and it is. You can buy one as an add-on. They see it as not necessary for the large majority of people. And in fact, I would say that the next generation of consoles, it's very likely that they will not come with disk drives, and that disk drives will be add-ons for those as well.
have so much nostalgia for a disc. Jason, super quick, the details of pre-ordering and when PS5 Pro actually comes out.
Yes, it comes out, I believe, November 6th, and it is $700. And pre-orders they're going to make available, I believe, in the next couple of weeks. I believe in 2 weeks or so.
Some of those FX price point differences from the UK and EU as well, one to watch. Bloomberg's Jason Schreier, a joy to have you. Thank you. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Ed, don't dwell on your nostalgia for discs.
I know, but I will play some PlayStation today. Now, don't forget, recap the show on the podcast. You know where to find it, on the Bloomberg terminal, as well as online on Apple, Spotify, and iHeart. Huge thanks to everyone out in New York City, the team here in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg Technology.
Bloomberg covers the world with unmatched reach and resources. From more than 120 countries, the moment news breaks, 24 hours a day. Bloomberg, context changes everything.
This is Bloomberg News Now.
News when you want it at the touch of a button.
Another volatile day on Wall Street. We're seeing big moves.
All eyes on Capitol Hill as Democrats and Republicans prepare.
Today's job numbers casting doubt on the Fed's next move. Inflation remains front and center. And that's news when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. Get it 24/7 on the Bloomberg Business app, Bloomberg.com, and anywhere you get your podcasts.
Bloomberg News Now. Context changes everything.
It's the countdown to the market open as we bring you the first trades across Europe.
We'll debate the most important stories and what will drive the big investment decisions throughout the morning. I'm Guy Johnson.
I'm Kriti Gupta.
And I'm Anna Edwards. Join us every weekday morning for the opening trade, live at 7 a.m. here in London.
Only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Welcome to Bloomberg Markets. I'm Scarlett Fu. The disinflation narrative hits a bump in the road and traders immediately refresh their bets on the size of a Fed rate cut. Here's how it's playing out in financial markets. You have stocks. They stumbled out of the gate with the S&P 500 at one point falling as much as 1.6% after the government report showing consumer inflation unexpectedly rose in August. The NASDAQ, the clear outperformer here in that it is down by 0.25% as opposed to the S&P 500's 0.8%. 4% decline. But you have financials, the main decliners, whether you're looking at the S&P or the NASDAQ. Now, treasuries have been all over the place. They plunged initially after the CPI print, sending yields higher before recovering. The 10-year yield now marginally lower, little change really, at 3.64% before a 10-year auction of $39 billion worth in the next hour. And Bitcoin sliding after the presidential debate. Crypto has become part of the Trump trade overall, which are assets that move in tandem with Trump's election prospects. Let's go back to equities for a moment here and zero in on some individual movers on the equity side. And for that, we bring in Bloomberg Markets correspondent Abigail Doolittle. Abigail?
Well, Scarlett, this may be another piece of the Trump trade here, and this is Berkshire Hathaway over the last 2 days. Not that Berkshire Hathaway is associated with Donald Trump in any way, but it is one of the most highly taxed entities in the world. And of course, the former president talking about the possibility, if he were elected, a 15% corporate tax rate. So that would clearly benefit a company, an entity like Berkshire Hathaway, along with Apple, Microsoft, and some of those other largely taxed entities. You can see over the last 2 days down, but really today, after that debate, down 2.5%. This is the worst point drag, in fact, on the S&P 500. And I would argue in some ways it is a proxy for the S&P 500, but clearly the declines are outsized. If we take a look at what's happening beneath this surface to both the upside and the downside, First Solar up about 13%. You could maybe say that's in favor of VP Harris, green energy. NVIDIA up 2.9%. That may also be in favor of VP Harris, given the idea that J.D. Vance, the running mate, of course, with Donald Trump on their ticket, is perhaps wanting to break up big tech. NVIDIA not really a piece of that, but big tech, most of it for the most part doing okay today. Humana down 5.5%, and this healthcare insurance company, it's interesting. This could be seen as an anti-Trump trade. In addition, some of the Medicare stocks, in fact, trading higher, which would go in favor of Kamala Harris. And then finally, J.P. Morgan Chase having nothing to do with the debate at all, down about 0.6%. And of course, yesterday having the worst day in quite some time since 2020, after President Daniel Pinto, the president of J.P. Morgan, I should say, Daniel Pinto, said that analysts were way too optimistic about net interest income. Really a tell, perhaps, on the state of the economy. Some jitters there. I would argue that that could be shaping some of the market action today. And then finally, a completely idiosyncratic story of its own, Scarlett. Take a look at the shares of designer brands, down 16.6%. A pretty bad plunge. This, of course, is the parent of DSW. They missed numbers. Their comp's not great. The guide missed. So there's some weakness here. Yet another tell on the state of the consumer. DSW, where you can get nice shoes, designer shoes at a more discounted price. Well, they're not doing so well.
Yeah, it speaks volumes about where the consumer is at and what that might suggest about the economy going forward. Abigail, thank you so much. We'll check in with you a little bit later in the hour. Now, earlier today on Bloomberg Television, J.P. Morgan's David Kelly gave his take on where we stand with inflation right now.
It's very much on track, and I've been talking for a long time about, how the economy is, or how inflation is cooling. It's just cooling too slowly. Well, I can say that it is now cooled to room temperature. I mean, at 2.5% year over year, there really is not a significant inflation problem.
For more on the latest inflation data, let's bring in Stuart Paul from Bloomberg Economics. So, Stuart, the big picture here is that disinflation is still intact, but there was this one part of the report that indicated core CPI rising more than expected, 0.3%. What drove that unexpected pickup?
It's great that you use the terminology that inflation, the disinflation process hit a bump in the road. We did take a little bit of a detour, and it was because of travel in August. 7 basis points in core CPI month on month came from hotels, which increased in price about 1.8%, from airfares, which increased nearly 4% during the month of August. So we are seeing a little bit of that feed through from higher energy prices earlier during the summer, feeding into airfares within the core here. We should see some of that come back as we see future inflation prints. But with just 7 basis points coming from those two categories alone, which we think are going to be temporary, we don't take much of a signal from today's core CPI that anything is going to stop the Fed from cutting when the FOMC meets.
Okay, now also according to the BLS, shelter was, quote, the main factor in the overall advance. When we say shelter, what does that mean? Is it rent? Is it owner's equivalent rent, which is basically what we pay to service your mortgage?
The three primary subcategories of shelter are primary rents, owner's equivalents of rents, and lodging away from home, mostly hotels. We know that hotels ticked up at an accelerated pace. We also saw owner's equivalent of rent rise about 0.5% during the month, up from just under 0.4% in July. So that housing inflation that we've seen persist, the choppiness that we've seen over the past several months, that's continuing to be a problem, but it is the sort of thing that the Fed reads through because of how slowly housing inflation moves.
How slowly housing inflation moves. So does shelter become a leading indicator, a lagging indicator, or a coincident indicator of where prices go overall?
It's a good question. It's primarily a lagging indicator. You can look at, so the first thing is that the BLS infers owner's equivalent of rents based on rent, based on actual leases that are signed.
Okay.
But that takes about 6 months. There's a 6-month process and survey window that the BLS uses. And it also takes time for leases to turn over and for price pressures to wane for actual primary rents. So it is definitely a lagging indicator, and it can take upwards of a year for waning price pressures experienced by the consumer when they're signing leases to actually show up in the BLS data.
So bottom line, the Fed can't declare victory on inflation just yet, but things are still headed in the right direction.
Things are headed in the right direction, and a lot of the main drivers of core inflation in August, the Fed can read through when it's setting policy.
All right, fantastic stuff. Stuart Paul of Bloomberg Economics, thank you so much for putting that all into context. Now, for more on how this data is being received in the markets right now, let's bring in PGIM Fixed Income Chief Investment Strategist Robert Tipp. Robert, certainly you look at the market reaction and stocks tumbled right out of the gate. Treasuries had a bit more of a, let's just say, inconsistent reaction. What is your take here in terms of the signal that investors are giving to this latest data?
Sure. You know, I think as Stuart was going through, the underlying message here is that the inflation situation is coming under control and is 180 degrees diametrically opposed to what we were looking at, say, a year and a half ago, when inflation was high and broad-based. Now you have inflation that's low, ex-food, energy, and shelter. Over the last 4 months, inflation is running at less than 0.5% annualized. Running, well below target. The only thing holding it up are these factors in shelter, and those, when you're down to when inflation is narrow, that's not something that the Fed can really pinpoint and control. It's not a generalized problem for them. So totally different world in terms of inflation that arguably maybe had it below target. At June, you couldn't tell. Inflation, we were all in a transitory, traumatic stress syndrome. We had seen low inflation second half of last year. It popped up earlier in the year, but as you can see in your diagram here, it's all core services that are holding it up, and that's primarily shelter.
Right.
So very good news on the inflation front overall.
So services is a little bit more of a concern because sometimes the prices in services can be stickier than the prices in goods. The Fed, we know, has a dual mandate to maximize inflation and to maximize employment, and manage inflation. And you can argue that inflation was the #1 priority during the hiking part of this cycle. And of course, employment is going to be the fixation for the cutting part of the cycle here. So how do this week's CPI print that we got today, and of course tomorrow's PPI print that we're getting tomorrow, how much will that answer the question of whether the Fed cuts 25 or 50 basis points? Or do we need to see the employment data for the Fed to make that final determination?
Right. I mean, I think we have all the information we need. I think that the differences between, say, the U.S. and Europe, services in Europe are sticky, the inflation rate is high, and the wages inflation is running high relative to productivity. In the United States, it's really the rents, it's not the wages. So I think the Fed's degree of anxiety on inflation is something that they're going to watch, of course, but I think the anxiety is gone. I think the anxiety has shifted 100% for all practical purposes to employment. Employment that as of June, looking backwards, was growing at a really solid pace. You could quibble about whether you like the kinds of jobs being created, but it was a solid pace. Now, between the prints that we've seen in the revisions, you have a rising unemployment rate and an unacceptable rate of job growth. And so the Fed, I think, is going to start with 25.
Okay.
Before they went into the blackout period, They did not signal 50, but I think what we're going to see from them is a desire not to alarm anyone, but the notion that they may need to be neutral or accommodative. They need to bend the line. They need to get a little bit higher rate of job creation at this point. And frankly, for most of the components of inflation, they're running below pre-COVID levels, which, if you recall, was when they were going from 2 3/8 into the ones with an unacceptably low rate of inflation. So this is a 180-degree turnaround from where they were 3 months ago.
Absolutely. So, Robert, you had mentioned Europe. The ECB, of course, meets tomorrow and is expected to cut rates for a second time. I know that this won't influence what Jay Powell and company do next week, but talk about how the ECB is being ahead when it comes to cutting rates, ahead of the Fed at least, means for how investors adjust their holdings of European sovereign debt versus treasuries.
Sure. Well, I think big picture, rates have revalued. I mean, the ECB was at -50, they hiked to 4, now they're at 375, and they're on their way down. But we're at a dramatically higher level of interest rates than we were, for the prior decade. And this is an attractive level of yields in Europe, even though it is lower than the US. Like I said, the service inflation is holding up in Europe. They're going to be a little bit more cautious, but their mandate allows them to manage growth such that it's at a level that they think will be consistent with 2% inflation, and growth in Europe is too slow. So they're going to be cutting rates, but at a pace that's probably slower than that of the Fed, because they're going to need to see more information on the inflation side showing that they are really getting back down to target.
All right, Robert, really appreciate your joining us and sharing your perspective. Robert Tipp is PGIM's fixed income chief investment strategist. Coming up on Bloomberg Markets, we head to Philadelphia for a live report on the fallout from last night's presidential debate. In the market today, we do see shares of Trump media under pressure. You can see down 11% over the past 2 days. By the way, the company also facing the end of its lockup period as well. We're going to talk about the upcoming U.S. election, where things stand right now, next. This is Bloomberg.
The names that move markets are on Bloomberg.
Our role in the world, our role in NATO in supporting the Ukrainians in this war, the unprovoked war that Russia has instigated in Ukraine, our support for the Indo-Pacific, for providing a counterbalance to China. All of that is in our interest, and whoever's president, I'm sure, is going to do what's in the best interest of the United States.
It is not a time for America to back off of its commitment around the globe. And I think there's a justification for us making certain that we do the right things in a way that we share the burdens with our allies. But I don't expect America to walk away from the world in any administration. It's about American security, and it's about making certain our adversaries, present and future, know that when America's committed to something, they're there for the long haul.
Bloomberg. Context changes everything. Today's CFOs are reshaping the C-suite. Bloomberg's chief future officer shines a spotlight on these dynamic leaders. Healthcare giant Johnson & Johnson is staking its future on innovation. Making investment decisions under pressure has become business as usual for CFO Joe Wolk.
The world is coming at us faster than it ever has. We're getting information more quickly. We're going to have to move faster. The competition's moving faster.
Watch Chief Future Officer Wednesday, only on Bloomberg.
She has no policy.
His plan is to do what he has done before, which is to provide a tax cut for billionaires and big corporations.
What they have given to China is unbelievable.
His next big court appearance is in November at his own criminal sentencing.
In Springfield, They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
The President of the United States incited a violent mob to attack our nation's capital.
I probably a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me. They're the threat to democracy.
Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people, and clearly he is having a very difficult time processing that.
This is Bloomberg Markets. I'm Scarlett Fu. Last night, Americans were able to see former President Trump and Vice President Harris face off, outline their plans, and, of course, target each other's records. This morning, the two were at the 9/11 Memorial in Lower Manhattan, along with President Biden. Let's go now to Bloomberg's David Gura, who's in Philadelphia and joins us live. David, you were at the venue for yesterday's debate. You were also in the spin room as well. I know that this happened last night. We've moved on since then, but I'm curious about what your impression was about the mood and the vibes in the room after the debate wrapped. I'm sure it contrasted dramatically with what happened in Atlanta after the Biden-Trump debate.
Yeah, you go back to that debate in June, and afterward there was this kind of weird silence that was overlaying the whole place. We went down to the spin room floor, and it took about 10 or 15 minutes for the Democratic surrogates to come out and meet with reporters. This was a much more traditional or normal spin room. In fact, some people were out spinning and talking their candidates' books before the debate even ended. It went a little longer than it was supposed to. But look, we talked yesterday just about sort of the objectives each candidate had, and Vice President Harris wanted to talk about policy. She kind of sandwiched a lot of comments about style, efforts to bait former President Trump into a sandwich of policy. She talked about economic policy at the top, talked about it at the bottom as well. I think it's suffice to say this was a big success for her last night. She came across as somebody who could fill that office as president, seemed presidential, and as I say, was able to kind of get Donald Trump off his game over the course of this debate. I mean, his advisors wanted him to talk about policy and wanted him to seize on just a handful of topics, wanted him to talk about immigration from a policy perspective, wanted him to talk about the economy, wanted to talk about this kind of line of continuity that he sees between what a Biden presidency and a Harris presidency would be like. And over again, as we heard in that tape just a moment ago, he kept getting derailed, taking the bait, and this was not the debate that he nor his advisors wanted to have last night.
I'm curious what else happened at the debate that we didn't get to see because, you know, we went to commercial break, for instance. Were you able to see on any monitors, for instance, what was going on during those breaks in between the questions?
We weren't, but I kind of read the pool report and sort of got a sense of the frostiness that was in that very intimate studio. They were standing very near each other. It was just them and the two moderators from ABC News in that room. And we talked yesterday as well, Scarlett, just about this mute button and what effect that would have. It was interesting to see sort of how Vice President Harris dealt with that. She didn't want to have that mute button, and you saw her using phrases or mouthing phrases like, "That's not true," which were legible to even a novice lip reader like myself during the course of that debate. So she was able to do that kind of effectively. And in the room, in the spin room where we were, which was also the media filing center, you know, there was a good deal of kind of reaction to the debate thus far during those breaks. And I should say afterward, we had the surrogates come in, and there was the announcement from a surrogate who was not present, and that's Taylor Swift, the international pop star. And when that endorsement came through, there was kind of a frisson or a buzz throughout the whole filing center as reporters were showing each other their phones and looking at the now famous Instagram post of Taylor Swift and a cat giving her endorsement to Kamala Harris.
Yeah, love Taylor / childless cat lady. Did Donald Trump, because he did show up in the spin room, or any of his surrogates say anything about the Taylor Swift endorsement?
They didn't address it specifically, and I talked to Michael Wadley, who's the head of the Republican National Committee, and it was interesting. He and I talked about the debate. He was happy with how it unfolded. He didn't have a pessimistic outlook on how it went or where things are headed, and notably, he said he'd like to see more debates. That is in stark contrast to what we heard from former President Trump this morning. He said he would be disinclined to have another debate. If you look at the other candidate, Vice President Harris, I talked to a number of her surrogates yesterday after that debate, and all of them to a T said they hope that as a means of carrying momentum forward, there will be at least one other debate between these two candidates. Now, as we talked about, the calendar is pretty short here. There's a vice presidential debate scheduled in New York on October the 1st. A very open question here if we're going to see these two candidates on stage once again and sort of what that debate might look like if it happens.
Yeah, you mentioned the vice presidential debate. I mean, Trump didn't do his VP pick any favors by contradicting what J.D. Vance had said about, you know, a so-called abortion ban. Is J.D. Vance helping or hurting Trump's ticket right now?
J.D. Vance is proving to be a bit of a difficulty for the former president as he campaigns. So we were talking about Taylor Swift a moment ago, childless cat ladies, as you referenced. So this is a comment that he made when he was campaigning for Senate just over a year ago when he was having an interview with Tucker Carlson, who was then with Fox News. It's taken on a life of his own, and we know very well that Donald Trump doesn't like to have any distraction from him and his messaging, certainly not by a running mate. So he is a bit of a liability in that regard, and you bring up this issue of abortion. I mean, this was a moment during that debate when Donald Trump started out by talking about abortion policy in a very traditional Republican way, saying it should be left up to the states to decide what that abortion policy is, but then moved to great exaggeration and conspiracy theories. And the point of contrast with J.D. Vance is that he talked about vetoing, allowing a national ban on abortion, and Donald Trump saying that he disagrees with that in the moment, that it's something that he and J.D. Vance have a disagreement on. So there's the nagging history of what J.D. Vance said before, and there's also just these kind of disagreements that have come to light since Donald Trump has picked him as a running mate.
All right, Bloomberg's David Gura live on the scene in Philadelphia. Thank you so much. Coming up on Bloomberg Markets, we're going to head over to Cantor Fitzgerald's trading floor with one of the celebrities attending the event, NFL star Victor Cruz. He's raising funds for charity as Cantor Fitzgerald marks 9/11 with its special fundraising event. This is Bloomberg.
Our principles, our policies in support of the Palestinian people will never change. Our policy in having a two-state solution will never change, and nothing will compromise it. And as long as we are, having the capability to be helpful, we will do it. We did that between Afghanistan, between Taliban and the U.S. We did that between different parties in Lebanon, in Sudan, and others. And that's basically the core of our foreign policy. It's been built based on mediation, on trying to help in resolving conflicts between the party. There are countries or people might not like it, but we don't ask everyone to like it, just to understand it.
Fixed income fix. Watch Bloomberg Real Yield every Friday right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
This is Bloomberg Markets. I'm Scarlett Fu. On September 11th, 2001, Cantor Fitzgerald lost 658 employees in the World Trade Center terrorist attacks. Since then, the Cantor Fitzgerald Relief Fund has focused on giving financial support to families affected. More than a dozen celebrities are on the Cantor trading floor. They're calling clients in an effort to raise money for their own charities as well. We're joined now by former NFL player, longtime New York Giant, Victor Cruz. Victor, thank you so much for joining us. How's it going there on the floor today? And how much money are you making for the Victor Cruz Foundation?
It's going well here on the floor. There's a lot of energy, as you can see behind me. A lot of things going on, a lot of different celebrities making their way through. And we're making some money. I don't have a full tally just yet, but I know I've been making a bunch of trades and raising some money for not only Cantor Fitzgerald, but for the Victor Cruz Foundation as well.
Right, and I know that celebrities like you are asked to kind of fulfill some of the orders. Can you give us a sense of what people are buying or selling? Is there a lot of talk of, say, NVIDIA or the Trump media company coming up?
I actually can't tell you that. I have no idea, to be honest. I know that I've just been making some solid trades, and you know, it's always interesting when you're just throwing $20 million, $30 million around like it's nothing. It's always a fun time yelling those numbers out.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine. I want to talk to you about the changing landscape of the NFL, because clearly this has been a big offseason with the NFL now allowing private equity, institutional investors to take stakes in certain teams. I'm curious to hear from you how you think this is going to change the player's experience, what it means for big money to come into the game like this.
It'll be interesting to see how it changes. It'll be interesting to see how these players kind of think about their deals differently, how to think about their extensions differently, you know, realizing what markets to play in, what markets not to play in, what teams they want to be part of, who's owning these teams, and what type of investments they'll be able to do within them as well. So I'm excited to see where the future of this is. You can see more and more ownership going just into the players and having more control. And who knows, we might have a former player be able to be in one of these investments and own some of these teams and be part of it from an equity standpoint, so it could be fun.
Yeah, Curtis Martin, of course, Football Hall of Famer, is definitely part of these efforts to get more players of color involved as well. Very quickly here, I know that you did not play football in an era of legalized sports betting, but that's got to be hard for the players who are still in the NFL right now.
Yeah, it's very difficult, and you've already seen some guys kind of get in trouble with it as well, but it's just hard to police, especially, you know,
Goldman Sachs CEO Solomon says, I certainly see 2, maybe 3 Fed cuts through the fall.
So it's just going to be interesting to see how they police it from inside the game when you're an actual player and how they do it moving forward.
Victor Cruz, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. Former New York Giant football star Victor Cruz down at the trading floor of Cantor Fitzgerald on their charity day. Coming back, we turn back to the markets as investors continue to make sense of the latest inflation data. This is Bloomberg.
In 2015, I was not optimistic because nobody was working on the hard problems. The energy R&D budgets had gone down. The venture investing in climate had gone down. It was completely out of fashion. So I don't know what people were optimistic about then. The fact is, we built essentially from scratch, you know, with lots of supporters, a really mind-blowing level of innovation against emissions. And you know, in the last 9 years, that's gone better than I would have expected. So only now could you even, you know, plausibly be optimistic about the path of emissions. And someone who said, hey, nobody's ever scaled things up like the speed that we knew to before, they're welcome to say, hey, I'll believe this when I see it. You know, in the meantime, some people who care about this issue are really out, you know, trying to think, do we need permitting reform? You know, do we find, what new ideas haven't we found yet? You know, how do we fund people with those new ideas? How do we get the costs of these things down? How do we collaborate on a global basis? So we're still not at the point where it's guaranteed or even that it'll be easy, but at least there's a theory of change.
There is this real momentum from Wall Street.
We are basically deep in the European earnings season.
Take a look at how we're faring when it comes to Asian markets.
Welcome to Bloomberg Markets. I'm Scarlett Fu. Let's take a look at how markets are tracking right now because stocks have come off their lows. They're still down. The S&P 500 losing 0.4%, but at one point it was down 1.6% on that hotter than expected inflation print, consumer prices at least. The NASDAQ, the better performer here, gaining 0.4%, and we'll get into some of the individual movers there. A lot of movement in the Treasury space, but right now the 10-year yield little changed, up almost 2 basis points at 3.66%. There's a big auction coming up, $39 billion of 10 years being sold in about 30 minutes time. And Bitcoin off by more than 1% as part of the Trump trade following yesterday's presidential debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. Now let's get to those midday equity movers and bring in Abigail Doolittle. Abigail, what do you see?
Well, one reason we're off those lows, Scarlett, because at the lows we did have the S&P 500 down more than 1%. I think even down more than 1.5%. Take a look at NVIDIA right now near session highs or at session highs of 4.3%, really holding well above $100 per share, which seems like a dividing line, at least technically. And it's interesting because, of course, is one of the biggest weightings to the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ. It's taken both of these indexes off of their lows, and the NASDAQ 100, last time I checked, positive. You can see the other chip stocks, including some of the semi-cap equipment companies, going higher. It's not clear why NVIDIA is higher. I don't see any fundamental reason on the tape, but it just seems as though some of those dip buyers are moving in. As for what is still dragging on the S&P 500, if we take a look at the shares of Tesla, they are down 1.5%, maybe after that debate last night. Of course, CEO Elon Musk is aligned with the former president, Donald Trump, and there's some idea that his showing in the debate last night was less strong than VP Harris's. Visa, PepsiCo, and McDonald's, all these stocks lower. I'm not able to find reasons why, but I would argue that these are the value stocks, that they could be associated in some ways with the Trump trade. So this board, I think the case could be made that it supports the idea that markets are weighing in, saying that Donald Trump did not perform as well as VP Harris yesterday in that debate, last night in that debate. When we put it all together with the S&P 500, one reason to think that NVIDIA probably is going to struggle going forward is this chart that on today's earlier weakness really turned very heavy. This is a consolidation area. You could call it a range. You could also call it a possible double top. That's pretty wonky, but below the 50-day moving average, today's candle bar there that you can see almost below the last low, setting up, Scarlett, for what could potentially be a very fast drop back toward the summer's lows. We don't know that that's going to happen, but this chart does skew pretty bearishly. So let's stay tuned. We'll be here to report on it.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much, Abigail Doolittle, for that setup. Now, with these downside risks present in the technicals as well as the eco data, we caught up with Bridgewater's Rebecca Patterson about the latest inflation numbers. Here's what she said.
It is time, given the inflation data, given the labor market softening, for them to move closer to neutral. The question I think that I don't think is resolved yet is what is the speed of that easing to get back to neutral? And then what is neutral? I think there's still debate on what the long-term neutral rate is.
For more on how investors are interpreting all this data, let's bring in Crossmark Global Investments Chief Market Strategist, Victoria Fernandez. Excuse me there. Victoria, it is so good to see you. I look at what happened in the markets right at the open, the S&P 500 plunging as much as 1.6% within the first 70 minutes of trade or so. It felt like an outsized reaction to a modest move higher in the core CPI month-over-month basis. Everything else was pretty much bang in line with economists' estimates. Was this an outsized reaction to you?
Well, I think it was a surprise to many people. If you listen to what a lot of the market participants are saying, and even to what Powell is saying, they weren't worried about inflation anymore. Inflation was under control. It was going to be moving in this downward trajectory, and they were focused on the labor market. And, you know, we always put an asterisk by that and saying, look, we're not sure that inflation is going to continue to move down consistently. There's some stickiness here, and there's actually some areas of the market that are going to be moving higher. And I think that's what we saw today. You saw airlines move higher, used cars move higher. I mean, year over year, everything in the core component is 5% to almost 20% higher year over year still. So I think it maybe was a little bit of a shock to some people in the market that inflation inflation could still be a concern, and therefore probably took 50 basis points off the table for the September meeting, which the market had already priced in. I think that was probably the catalyst for such a big move.
Okay, got it. Now, how much anticipation, nervousness do you think there is ahead of tomorrow's PPI report, given the CPI print we got today?
Yeah, usually there's a little bit less volatility around the PPI report. I don't think we'll see such a large move, even if it is a little bit higher than expected. However, PPI report usually does not give us so much angst as the CPI report does. It will, however, give us a look into, do we need to revise earnings expectations going forward? You know, there's people that still have these double-digit earning expectations, and if PPI moves higher, we know that those margins are going to take another hit in the coming months. So perhaps there will be some revaluation going on if PPI is significantly higher.
Okay, really, really important points there. And I'm glad you bring up earnings, because I think about the financials and the kinds of pressure that they've been under recently. JP Morgan Chase, for instance, is down for a 6-day in 7. And it was just yesterday that the president, Daniel Pinto, said analysts are being too optimistic in projecting the bank's expenses and net interest income. And that kind of took down the entire bank sector overall. How big of a surprise do you think that was to investors who had kind of like put aside the idea of banks as being an area of potential negative surprise, given that they've done so well with higher rates, and with rates going down going forward, the funding costs become a lot easier for the banks?
Yeah, well, Scarlett, look, banks have been an area that we've liked all year. We've been trimming some of those tech names and buying financials over the last few quarters, and they have done really well, as you mentioned. So they were probably ready for a little bit of a pullback. But look, financials are still in an uptrend if you want to look at the technicals of that sector. So we actually look at some of the pullbacks that you're seeing as buying opportunities, especially leading in to the first Fed rate cut. Historically, they come off a little bit before the first cut, and then following the first cut up to about 6 months, you see them trend higher. So if you can buy them now at a little bit of a lower price, I think you can do that. But from a bigger perspective in regards to earnings, I do think the market's going to have to reset some expectations across the board for earnings on the revenue side, especially, leading us to some concern around the consumer and around jobs as we head into 2025, because we know as revenues come down, in order to keep those earnings higher, they start cutting jobs. So I think it starts kind of a snowball effect that we could see in the rest of this year and into early next year.
Yeah, really important points, especially as we see companies like Designer Brands International, which is the owner of DSW, come through with disappointing comparable sales numbers. Speaking of the different sectors here, you mentioned consumers. We were talking about the financial sector. I look at the worst performers for the past 5 days, for the past month, and for the past 3 months, and it's always energy. Energy is the bottom of the pile here. For the past 3 months, it's down about 6.8%, and oil prices have just been going down, down, down. How are you viewing this sector?
Yeah, so look, you're asking a girl that's sitting in Houston right now, right, on what we're thinking on the energy sector. Long term, you want to have exposure to energy. Have we had this pull down? We have, because now the United States is producing more and more. There was some concerns around OPEC Plus and the supply that they were going to have, and increasing supply there. That came off a little bit, and so you had prices rebound. You're going to have a lot of volatility here with geopolitical events. We have the hurricane that should be making landfall, if it hasn't already, in Louisiana and our neighbors there today, that could affect prices. So there's lots of volatility going on in energy. What I would say is that these are companies that have strong cash flows and pretty solid balance sheets with good dividend components for many of them. So I think you can have them as a long-term holding in your portfolio, but I would be a little cautious if you're looking at trading them on a daily basis, because the volatility will remain high.
Yeah, the volatility will remain high. We certainly see that with WTI and Brent consistently moving lower. I know they're a little bit higher today with Brent currently above $70, but unclear how long that will be the case for. Going forward, until the FOMC meeting next Wednesday, what will you be focused on? What will the market be fixated on until then?
Well, I think there's a few elements. Probably
Goldman Sachs CEO Solomon says, my best guess for next week's Fed meet is a rate cut of 25 basis points.
And even though these aren't going to be the main numbers that everyone looks at, it's going to help either build a story that the labor market is weakening, or it will give us a little bit of support to say that things are maybe stronger than what they anticipated. I do think we're seeing that sector weaken. We'll see what the weekly claims look like. Continuing claims is important because some of those people actually on continuing claims are moving off of those rolls and into the ones that are 27 plus weeks. That area is actually moving higher, causing some concern. We're seeing full-time workers decline and part-time workers increase. That's not a good sign for the labor market. So there's some elements there that I think people will be focused on since the Fed is saying that's what they're focused on.
Absolutely. I look at initial jobless claims, and the initial estimate right now is for 227,000 claims for unemployment. Victoria Fernandez, thank you so much. Crossmark Global Investments Chief Market Strategist joining us from Houston. Now coming up, NVIDIA's Jensen Huang says it's been a scramble to satisfy some of its more passionate customers while dealing at the same time with supply limitations. NVIDIA is our stock of the hour next. This is Bloomberg.
So what's it like moving from the East Coast, where everything is finance and money, to the West Coast, where everything is technology? Did you fit in right away? And did you really know how to use all the computer things that they give you to use?
So it was pretty fun. There were plenty of times where I would sit around in meetings and literally I would be Googling terms. And at one meeting, Larry Page actually caught me Googling terms, and he kind of pointed that out to other people in the room, which was a little embarrassing, but I figured there were some things that I could do that they couldn't do. And so it was a learning curve. And my dad always, he taught me at a young age a term that I've used constantly with my teams. He said, in his lab at Stanford, if a physicist could not define a quark in under 30 seconds, they didn't know what they were talking about. And so I use the quark
Goldman
test all the
Sachs
time.
CEO
If
Solomon
somebody's
says, I could
rambling
see them
on and
cutting
on
by
and they
50
can't get to the
basis
point,
points
they
given
probably
the
don't know what
softening.
they're talking about. They failed the quark test. My finance team knows this quark test. And at Google, I'm working with amazing computer scientists, so they never fail the quark test. They can explain things really clearly, which shoots you up the learning curve.
But did you understand what they were talking about from the beginning, or did you have a special tutor that's taught you technology? Or did you
I had actually run tech banking and took Google Public, so I had a little sneak preview.
The top names at Jackson Hole are on Bloomberg.
We need to start moving rates down, no question about it. 25, 50, that doesn't matter so much as commit to a process. Be methodical about the process. So don't just stop and start. Don't just do a large decrease and then stop and then start again. Just start a process and keep it moving.
Nobody covers Jackson Hole like Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
As we spend some time here on the broader presidential race.
Let's focus in on European politics.
Makes you wonder how politics might play out.
Bloomberg loves earnings.
I know it's like your Super Bowl, right?
I can't wait. It's like opening presents in the morning.
All right, it will be exciting.
Nobody covers earnings like Bloomberg.
Delivery of our components and our technology and our infrastructure and software is really emotional for people because it directly affects their revenues, it directly affects their competitiveness. And so we probably have more emotional customers today.
That was NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang speaking at the Goldman Sachs conference in San Francisco. Investors have been anxious to get updates on the rollout of NVIDIA's Blackwell chip, its next generation chip. NVIDIA, by the way, is our stock of the hour. Joining us now for more on this is Melissa Otto. She's head of TMT research for S&P Global Visible Alpha. Melissa, good to see you. Engineering snags, the manufacturing delay of Blackwell has really agitated investors over the past month. But these are normal things in the production of chips, isn't it?
Thank you. It's great to be here. I just came from that presentation at the Goldman conference. It was fascinating to hear Jensen.
Fed bids for 10-year notes total $372.7 million.
I think in terms of Blackwell, a couple of critical points that he highlighted. Demand is so great. As you highlighted in the opening quote from him, it is an emotional time for customers. And I think, as we look out and think about what the expectations are for Blackwell, there is a lot of debate out there. Based on Visible Alpha consensus, coming into the Q4, consensus is expecting $2.5 billion in revenues from Blackwell, and then looking ahead to next year, that jumps to $55 billion. But the range of estimates for next year is very significant. We see estimates that are significantly above that $55 billion as well as below. So I think that may be contributing to some of the volatility and debate out there in the market around what the real valuation is for the stock going forward.
Yeah, that's a really important point, because one thing that Jensen Huang did say in last month's earnings call was that NVIDIA expects to bring in, quote, several $1 billion in revenue from Blackwell in its fiscal fourth quarter. For investors, that wasn't specific enough. Is this the right data point for everyone to fixate on?
This is the next gen, right? So this is where it's all headed, which seems to be where the investment community is very focused. Coming into the Q3, there isn't much expectation for Blackwell, so it means that the guidance that the company gives in Q4 and what they deliver actually in Q4 are going to be critical data points, whether or not they exceed expectations in the quarter and whether or not their outlook for next year exceeds that expectation of that $55 billion revenue level that's baked into the market currently.
I think that's really important, the fact that there isn't a whole lot of expectation placed for third quarter, so it's really going to be on how much they can narrow or how much he can narrow his commentary for the fourth quarter. That being the case, Melissa, do you think Jensen Huang has done a good job managing investors' expectations? What kind of grade would you give him?
He's an exciting speaker to listen to. He's very inspirational. I think it's really going to come down to a lot of moving parts and how the company is actually able to, one, deliver this next generation of capabilities to its customers. And that's not just about one person. That's about his whole company really working together with suppliers and the whole ecosystem with customers to ensure that those expectations are aligned, and that is certainly no easy task.
All right, Melissa Otto, always a pleasure speaking with you. Melissa is head of TMT research for S&P Global Visible Alpha. Coming up, Bloomberg's Sonali Basak is at the Cantor Fitzgerald trading floor with NFL star Rob Gronkowski. He is raising funds for charity as Cantor Fitzgerald marks 9/11 with a special fundraising event. We'll bring that to you live. This is Bloomberg.
Do you think it'll be the case where someday you would be an investment committee or I'll be an investment committee and we just apply AI, decide whether it's a good deal or not, or we're not going to be there anytime soon?
I don't think we'll be there in the near term. And David, because being on investment committees, there's the analytics of the math, there's the people, and then there's judgment. So analytics and math, I think AI will help us get way more refined. Right now, we have analysts building models upon models. Our typical investment memo is 86 pages. So we could refine that down very, very seamlessly to pieces. The people aspect to it, to make a judgment call on, do I believe this entrepreneur is going to go the next mile?
At 1 p.m. Eastern Time, we get the US 10-year note auction, prior bid cover of 2.32 and a prior high yield of 3.96%.
The final piece ends up being judgment. And I don't believe we've seen anything yet that gives us a sense of judgment that we're able to apply.
From the world of politics to the world of business, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines deliver news, insight, and analysis live 2 times a day every trading day. Balance of Power at 1 and 5 Eastern, only on Bloomberg.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute technology news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Annabelle Drawlers in Taipei, and this is Bloomberg.
So latest CFTC positioning data shows speculators were net short 84K Ultra 10-year note futures, the least since late 2022. And primary dealers' position in 7 to 11-year sector was net long $30.8 billion in the week ended August 28th versus $16.9 billion in average net long over the past year.
With one of those celebrities, an NFL star, Shonali?
Yes, you may remember Rob Gronkowski, of course, of NFL fame here, formerly of the Patriots, now here for Charity Day at Cantor Fitzgerald. What brings you here?
Well, this is actually my 3rd year coming here with Cantor Fitzgerald, and this is my 3rd year in a row coming with my girlfriend Camille as well. And when I first heard about it, first got asked to come, I thought it was a no-brainer. I mean, Cantor Fitzgerald just does such a great job remembering those that were fallen, that are deceased from the 9/11 event in 2003 that occurred. So it's just an amazing tradition what Cantor Fitzgerald is doing just to remember everyone, that has passed away and just bringing awareness to that situation and just raising money for great causes out there as well. And today we're actually raising money for my foundation as well, to the Gronk Nation Youth Foundation, which is really cool.
At the end of the day, too, what's been interesting is watching you and many other celebrities here placing trades. What are you thinking about in terms of your career now after football? Well, you seem to be quite the businessman.
Yes, I am quite the businessman, that's for sure. I'm doing a lot of things out there. My favorite opportunity is a new salad joint, new salad venture that I've invested into. I'm a co-founder, and it's actually just started in the Florida area, in the Tampa, geography. We got 3 stores now, and we're going to be just expanding rapidly. But also here, I want to bring the stock market back. I heard it's down right now with the election thing and everything that's going on. So I'm here at Cantor Fitzgerald to do some trades. I want to do the biggest trades of the day and bring that stock market so it's just booming back, back up to the sky.
Well, we'll absolutely let you know where the day ends today. I'm also interested in other forms of business and sports together. We have seen recently the NFL approve private equity interest in teams. Really curious about where you think that's going to take things moving forward.
Well, I mean, I didn't know about that. That's the first time I was aware of that situation. I really don't know how that works, the private equity, with teams in the NFL. I mean, I'm not at that stage of being an owner of a team or participating of being an ownership of a team. Yes, I would love to own a team. I mean, I feel like the NFL only goes up and up and up, and Tom Brady is actually on the verge of owning a team, and what an excellent gig to get into. That would be amazing if he does, because then he can maybe break the barrier of players getting in to ownership. So hoping that all falls through, and he deserves it as well, everything that he has done for the game. But with the private equity stuff that we're talking about, I'm not too familiar with it, so I really can't comment too much.
Your former teammate, you mentioned Tom Brady here, starting his career as an announcer for Fox. How do you grade his performance?
Yes, he did really well. I feel like he was a rookie out there, a highly anticipated rookie. I mean, there was a lot of hype. I think there was a little bit more hype than there should have been. I mean, I kind of put him on a pedestal of that he had to perform like he was shot out of a rocket ship, but I think he did an excellent job, and I feel like he's just only going to improve. I know him personally. He loves to improve. He likes to work on anything, any chance he has to, you know, any opportunity he has to get better, he's going to do, and he's just going to improve week in and week out. And I give him a passing grade. You know, he got the win in his first job, in his first, you know, opportunity of being an analyst.
What about you? What is your future media career looking like? You see that deal that Amazon struck with the Kelsey brothers, $100 million podcast deal. Do you want something like that?
Maybe, you know, I just want to do some stuff that I love to do. Like I said, I got into business, co-founding the salad place. Actually, I'm a co-founder of my brother's company too, Ice Shaker. And the only reason why I have this on me because I thought it looked cool with my shoes, and I put my protein shake in here this morning because I was on the go and spilled a little bit of it right here. But that's what happens. But love just getting into the business world. I mean, I'm actually starting a podcast with Julian Edelman.
So at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, we do get the US 10-year note auction, prior bid cover of 2.32 and a prior high yield of 3.96%.
So that'll be fun. I mean, I'm enjoying what I'm doing, you know. That's what's most important. I mean, I'm set for life for my football career, and it's really about enjoying and doing what I love to do. And hanging out with Julian and that crew is fun. Hanging out with the Fox guys when I do the Fox gig of the pregame show, they're great guys to hang out with, and just all the business ventures I'm in as well. They're with my friends and family, and love to do all that too. So I'm happy where I'm at.
Just 20 seconds. Too early to ask you who's going to win the Super Bowl this year?
Oh, man. I mean, I think the Kansas City Chiefs are going to be the team. I mean, you got to knock them off. I mean, I had Baltimore maybe being it, but they just showed it once again that they can't beat the Chiefs, that they can't, you know, amp up their game when needed. They can't win the big game. So I'm going to go with the Chiefs again. I mean, going for the three-peat. I mean, hey.
Rob, thank you so much for your time. Of course, that is Rob Gronkowski. Scarlett, back to you.
All right, Shonali Vasic, thank you so much. Rob Gronkowski making the call that he is looking for the Kansas City Chiefs to be three-peat Super Bowl champions for this season. And we'll take a look at how the markets are faring, because he says he wants to bring the markets back up. You do have the S&P 500 steadily paring its losses. It is now only down 0.25% after earlier falling 1.6%. The NASDAQ is higher. The NASDAQ 100 gaining 0.3%, led by some of those chip makers, including NVIDIA. We have a 10-year auction coming up in just minutes from now. The 10-year yield currently at 3.66%. This is Bloomberg.
Asia is at the forefront of some of the world's biggest stories. I'm Chevrian in Tokyo.
And I'm Heidi Stradwell.
US crude oil climbs over $2 a barrel on storm fears.
All the action to get you set up with the numbers, news, and knowledge you need for the day ahead.
The demand is indeed recovering.
We've been waiting for this moment.
The opportunity of a century.
Join us on Bloomberg The Asia Trade. It's only on Bloomberg TV. Context changes everything.
Good morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Welcome back to the opening trade.
This is Bloomberg Technology.
This is the Asia Trade.
You're watching the close.
Welcome to Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg. The top names Times at Jackson Hole are on Bloomberg.
I'd like to see us move toward a more real-time data set. So using new technologies, maybe some of the AI technologies, maybe we get better data as we move forward, but we've got to really focus on that with our economists and our analysts about, where
Shortly expecting the results of the 10-year note auction, the Treasury when issued yield comes out at the top of the hour.
Context changes everything. It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. We'll show you what's happening in ETFs like no one else. Bloomberg ETF IQ, Monday on Bloomberg. From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
The CPI drags on the markets just a day after the big debate. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as we pick up the pieces from the first debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, in which inflation was a featured topic. We'll have more on the data coming up with Anna Wong at Bloomberg Economics, and we'll distill that debate and talk policy.
Treasury when issued 10-year yield 3.662% for the $39 billion auction.
As we turn to Wall Street first, as always, on this CPI day, the way it's playing on the market's not great. Charlie Pellet in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there, Joe Matthew. Indeed, CPI Wednesday, we have got the Dow Jones Industrial Average, S&P, they are both lower. NASDAQ, though, interesting story. NASDAQ advancing up by about 0.4%. Keep in mind, have been down by about 1.5% earlier in the session, but right now, we've got NASDAQ up 0.4, higher by 65 points. S&P down 14. S&P at 54.81, drop right now of 0.3%, while the Dow Jones Industrial Average is down 257, a drop there of 0.6% for the Dow, well off session lows. 10-year at 3.66%, the 2-year 3.63%. Spot gold down $2 the ounce, a little change now, 25.14, while West Texas Intermediate crude rebounding by 3% today. WTI 67.74 a barrel. Brent trading back above $70 a barrel, closing in on 71 right now. A barrel of Brent, the global benchmark, up now by 2.5%. Shares in solar firms are climbing, while prison and cryptocurrency-linked companies are slumping following the first presidential debate between Democratic nominee Kamala Harris and Republican rival Donald Trump. Among solar names, we've got shares right now of Solar Edge Technologies up by about 5%, Sunrun higher now by 6.9%, and Sunnova Energy International down by 4.9%. Among prison stocks, Geo Group down by 6.8%, and CoreCivic trading lower by 4.9%. Immigration, of course, a major issue in this election. Those firms also run immigration detention facilities. And after last night's debate, shares of Donald Trump's social media company are tumbling. Shares of DJT, that is the parent of Trump Media and Technology Group, which operates.
So bid to cover ratio 2.64, 2.64, high yield 3.648%, 3.648%. As the US sells $39 billion in 10-year notes and awards 74.43% of bids at high. Primary dealers take 10.25%, direct 13.71%, and indirect 76.05%.
Now back we go to Washington, and once again your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet with a turn in the NASDAQ for us. We'll get back to Charlie in about 15, see how things are going, as Charlie Pellet always keeps us honest on the markets. Here on the fastest show in politics, thanks for joining us as we welcome our global TV audience to the conversation this day after the grand debate. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Kaylee Lyons is on assignment. With breaking news, before we get that far, to the data and the debate from Capitol Hill. This is important as we consider a funding deadline for the government looming on September 30th. House Speaker Mike Johnson just told reporters there will be no vote today on the short-term spending plan brought forward to avoid a government shutdown. Remember, this is the 6-month stopgap that had been put forth by the Speaker, paired with the SAVE Act that was said to be DOA in the Senate. It may not get that far as we consider the stakes here for the Speaker. The biggest problem, it seems, among his own Republican conference is the duration, 6 months, highlighted by defense hawks and the White House, as well as the Pentagon, as being potentially corrosive to military readiness, something we talked about earlier with Bloomberg's Tony Capaccio at the Pentagon. We'll see where this goes, but it looks like the speaker is going to delay the vote until next week. Fast forward to this morning, CPI day. I wonder how that debate would have gone last night if the data had been released yesterday. Core inflation picks up, damping odds of outsized Fed cut, the headline on the terminal. And we're joined now by an authority, Anna Wong, Bloomberg Economics chief U.S. economist. Anna, it's great to see you here at the table. Give us your sense on this. Shelter costs seem to be the biggest point of concern today.
Yeah, so the core CPI actually reached 0.28, and out of that, consensus was expecting about 0.21, and we can see that 7 basis points of that surprise is entirely due to two things. It is due to hotel prices and airfares prices. Shelter prices actually is in line with everybody's forecast, so there's no surprise there. And I think that the takeaway is that even though we are seeing a surprisingly hot core CPI, it's not from things that you generally think would be durable. It is kind of volatile, and the underlying tone of the report, when you dig into the details, is still for a slowdown ahead.
So what does Supercore tell you when we start stripping out some of these volatile factors, including shelter?
Yeah, so the super core actually won't be ready for, won't be a reliable estimate until we get PPI tomorrow. Yeah. And particularly, we're looking for the airfares in PPI, which is what goes into the PCE super core, to show a much lower pace of increase than what we saw in CPI today. We saw a 3.9% increase in airfares. We're expecting to see only 1% in PPI tomorrow. So that would mean that the Fed's preferred inflation gauge, which is core PCE deflator, would likely come in at 0.2 rather than the 0.3 in the core CPI.
So you point to the Fed. That's the big conversation now. The market seems to be taking 50 basis points on the table. Is that for good reason?
Well, you can see that what's interesting is that despite the core CPI surprise, the bond market is rallying on the long end. Usually when you see a positive surprise in inflation, long end will actually go up rather than go down. What this means is that people are only dimming the hopes for 50 bips in September, but they are still continuing to bet that there will be a 50 bips cut sometime either in November or December.
It'll probably need to be to get to the destination that we're looking at here. So how's this going to feel next week? I know you probably want to see data tomorrow. You want to look at PPI, but which Jay Powell is going to emerge?
Yeah, I think that this today's CPI report is continuing the tone from the jobs report last Friday, which is that it will be hard to build that sense of urgency to get the majority of the FOMC to be on the boat of 50 bips, even though I think that Powell is on that boat. He wants to cut 50 bips because he saw how bad the beige book was.
Yeah, wow, amazing. Just while you're here, lastly, crude oil. West Texas crude up $2. We're creeping back up on $68 a barrel, but there's been a remarkable decline in energy prices. We're seeing it at the gas pump as well. To what extent can that provide a buffer for an economic slowdown, or is that simply an indication of one?
So Bloomberg Economics has a decomposition of the drivers of oil movements, and currently we're seeing that about half of it is due to supply, increasing supply, which would be a buffer for our consumers, because it means that simply that it's not really slowing demand that's driving the oil price decrease, which means you have more money in the pocket. So in that sense, it is actually positive for the consumer. I would say that is actually one of the few positive economic data points we've seen in recent months.
I managed to find a silver lining.
Yes.
Almost never happens. Anna Wong, thank you so much. Great to see you. On CPI Day, no less, Bloomberg Economics chief U.S. economist. Anna, great to have you with us here on Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Of course, this was a big topic last evening. The economy, one of the first issues that came up in this debate. And Donald Trump has a pretty good story to tell on this, as he can simply point to the polls. He's certainly encouraged by the fact that voters tend to trust him more on the economy and when it comes to handling interest rates. Kamala Harris didn't spend a lot of time talking about price gouging last night. Interestingly, that's one of her primary proposals here when it comes to price controls or lowering inflation. She did get to housing initiatives, but there were a lot of issues on the table. Of course, a 90-minute throwdown here, and abortion was a big one. And this is, of course, a major point of contrast between these two candidates. While they may not have filled in a lot of blanks and details of policy proposals when it came to the economy, They did have some pretty harsh words when it came to reproductive rights. Let's bring you back to Philadelphia. Before we assembled our panel, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano were with us last night. They're back with us today following the debate last night.
Her vice presidential pick says abortion in the 9th month is absolutely fine. He also says execution after birth. It's execution, no longer abortion, because the baby is born, is okay. And that's not okay with me. Every Democrat, every Republican, liberal, conservative, they all wanted this issue to be brought back to the states where the people could vote.
Trump abortion bans that make no exception even for rape and incest. That is immoral. And one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree. The government, and Donald Trump certainly, should not be telling a woman what to do with her body. You want to talk about this is what people wanted? Pregnant women who want to carry a pregnancy to term, suffering from a miscarriage, being denied care in an emergency room because the healthcare providers are afraid they might go to jail, and she's bleeding out in a car in the parking lot. She didn't want that.
A spirited exchange and arguably a good moment for the vice president. But did either leave with a net gain last evening? Did they get to undecided voters, or were they simply fanning the base? We assemble our panel, our signature panel, back with us today. Also, I'm sure, on little sleep, Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis are with us. Bloomberg Politics contributors. Jeannie is a political science
According to
professor
Semaphore,
at
the U.S. is
Iona
closer
University,
to allowing
of
NVIDIA
course, as
chips
well,
for
Senior
Saudi
Democracy
Arabia.
Fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, Republican strategist, Bloomberg Politics contributor. Great to see you both. Jeannie, on this front, there's been so much talk about the role that female voters will play. Suburban women listening and watching closely last night who are also worried about rising prices, about crime in this country. Did Kamala Harris win any of them over in that moment?
I think she may have on this issue in particular. Obviously, to your point, it's an issue that she is strong on. You know, Donald Trump should have taken a page out of Nikki Haley's playbook. Nikki Haley had an ability to talk about this issue in personal terms, obviously tough for Donald Trump, but in personal terms, with an empathy towards women, particularly young women, but all women, and their need to have control of their bodies and their health. Donald Trump simply could not get there, and he's never been able to. And so he has told aides privately that this issue may be why he loses. And I don't think he's wrong about that. Very tough issue for him. And he was trying to explain, and he just couldn't get there. Because quite frankly, if you're going to start by we should be thanking him for getting Roe overturned and returning this to the states, that's losing on the face of it with most voters. And so he started from a losing position, and it only got worse the more he continued to try to defend himself.
Rick, I don't know what you think, what role, or if we can even quantify what role the issue of abortion is going to play in the general election, but does Donald Trump still have time to crystallize a message? He went last night for post-birth execution. Essentially, he was talking about he named the wrong governor, looking to West Virginia instead of Virginia on that one. It's one of the issues, one of the 4 issues debunked, fact-checked by the moderators last night. Why not talk about states' rights? Why not take that message that we heard earlier in the campaign?
Yeah, every now and then you have a issue that vexes a candidate, that just whatever you tell them isn't getting through. They can't put together the talking points in their head that they can accurately articulate. And this is the crucible of the problem for Donald Trump. I mean, you literally get to the point where you write it out on a card and you say, anytime you're asked a question about abortion, you take the card out of your vest pocket, you read it to the press, you put it back in, and you walk away. He cannot do that. And I would say, too, one of the things that has been happening on this issue is not just driving all the pro-choice voters that you can possibly do away from your campaign and into the hands of Kamala Harris, but the waffling on his own views on abortion, whether it's sort of this indecisive attitude about signing a national abortion ban, whether it's not sure whether or not you're going to support or not support the 6-week ban in Florida or the referendum that would loosen it up. his own base of social conservatives are really either confused or angry at this point. And the last thing you want to do is get the strongest core within your party, a group who you have benefited greatly by the appointments to the Supreme Court and the decisions they've made, upset with you because you're now trampling on the message that you should have.
Yeah. Interesting moment last evening, if I can call it that. I never thought I'd be having this conversation with Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. It's still trending on Twitter. It was last night, still up there now. Quote, "They're eating the dogs," all caps, on X. That's because Donald Trump did go there last night. I don't know if you heard about this trope that was on social media, that Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio were running around eating people's pets, eating the cats, the dogs, as he said. Interesting, ABC News reached out to the Springfield city manager to fact check that. Here's what it sounded like last night in Philadelphia.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country.
You bring up Springfield, Ohio, and ABC News did reach out to the city manager there. He told us there have been no
Shortly expecting the results of the Fed reverse repo operation.
Injured or abused by individuals within the immigrant community.
Well, I've seen people on television.
Let me just...
Seen people, he says, I've been watching the people on television. They said somebody ate their dog. Jeannie, I'm not even sure what to ask you about this, but is the former president just looking at the wrong websites?
Joe, he saw it on television, so it must be true. You know, I suspect David Muir, never thought he would have to fact check something like this. So, you know, here's a thing. You know how Bill Maher does those new rules? Here's a new rule. If you're in a presidential debate and you find yourself moving towards talking about unfounded things like dog eating people or people's eating dogs or whatever it was, maybe you should avoid it because it's not a winning message. I mean, this was the moment at which this debate was lost on points for Donald Trump. He didn't have a good night, but the idea that you would talk about this at a time when
58 counterparties take $279.215 billion at the Fed.